very exciting that you're here today. My name is Gretchen Mullen-Savitsky. I am the new president here. I came to New Hampshire July 1st, so I'm pretty much brand new. Loving the college, loving the state, just really very, very welcomed here, and I'm very excited that you're here today too. So we are at our second annual Mindfulness in Society conference, a 2-day conference. I think everyone in here knows the importance of mindfulness, but I hope that after the 2 days, you will know even more information about how mindfulness affects our health, affects the way that we interact with people, affects our economy, affects our workforce, it affects everything. All the things that we do, all the ways that we interact with each other. I've been practicing mindfulness for a few years now, and it's really affected me and really enhanced the way that I interact with others. So I think you're going to learn a lot over the next 2 days, or even if you're just here for 1 day. Very, very excited. But I want to make sure that I thank a few people. I'm very excited about the distinguished guests, the distinguished speakers that we have here today. So you're in for a treat. And I also want to thank, we have a small but very mighty team that really put this together. That's with Professor Houston, Dan Houston, Amy Proctor, and Laura Scott. Lots of work went into this, so we're very thankful for them. I'm going to turn it right over to Dan Houston. He's going to lead us off with the beginning of the conference. Thank you.
Okay, so it might be appropriate to say welcome back to many of you. This is the second annual Mindfulness in Society conference at NHTI. So thanks for coming, whether you were here last year or if this is your first year. And I was curious actually what it would feel like to look out at the audience, because a lot of people who are presenting, a lot of people who are here are people I know. It's been great to see so many of you. And great to start to meet the rest of you, so I look forward to getting to know those of you who I don't know yet. The main purpose of this conference, just so you know the sort of vision of it, is to help mindfulness spread effectively. It's a kind of in the last couple of decades, it's been growing by leaps and bounds internationally. And those of us who were involved in it before then are watching carefully to see how that's happening. And so the hope for this conference is that we can help that to happen in a productive way, because we believe that mindfulness has a lot to offer our society as long as it's done right. And so that's the sort of thrust and what we'll be hopefully exploring through the 3 keynote speakers we have that we're very lucky to have. And the presenters tomorrow, if you're staying for that, and we're also lucky to have them as well. Let's make sure I didn't forget to say anything before I move on. So I was going to thank Laura and Amy, but Gretchen beat me to that. I did want to also thank our sponsors. Some of you are here today, so this event wouldn't be happening without you. And to show you the basic plan for the day. If that goes. So in about a minute, we'll kick things off with Congressman Tim Ryan, and then Judson Brewer, and I'll be introducing all of these people. Then we'll take a brief break, followed by our 3rd keynote, Rhonda McGee. And then a panel discussion with all of them, moderated by Liz Konecki. And then a VIP reception later on, which I hope you can all stay for. And I'll be coming up here to introduce all of the speakers along the way. So the first speaker that we have is Tim Ryan, Congressman Tim Ryan. He's a congressman from Ohio and also a presidential candidate. And he's written a book on mindfulness. He's been a real advocate for mindfulness for years. And the book is called Healing America. It's available here, by the way, if you haven't already seen. There's a local book dealer, Gibson's, that's selling lots and lots of great books, including Tim's. And Tim has, among the things that he's done, He has worked with Parliament in England with their mindfulness efforts, and they're doing a lot over there. And he also spearheaded an event every month for Congress to meditate. Yeah. And we want them to attend that frequently. A few years ago, I took a trip down to DC to meet Tim once I realized what he was up to, and I was inspired by what he was doing. And so we met for a while, and not usually a big autograph person, but I wanted him to sign the first release of his book. And so he did, and this is what he wrote. Professor D, let's build a mindful nation. You're in charge of the Granite State. That was quite a charge. So this is part of that effort, and of course I recruited him to help. So I think I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Congressman Ryan, and he can tell you more about his perspective.
Can you hear me? Round of applause for Dan. So thank you. This is really terrific to be here. And Dan, sounds like you're meeting the charge I gave you a few years back. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. So this is like a conversation about building a mindful nation of sorts, building a mindful America. I think it'd just be helpful for me to talk a little bit about kind of how I got here, just for a few minutes, so you have some context, if there's not some random politician up on stage talking about mindfulness and has no idea what the hell he's talking about, which is not out of the realm of possibility. I grew up Catholic in Northeast Ohio, and I had a priest friend of mine right out of high school who I had a lot of respect for, and it was this little Irish priest who was a very spiritual guy, and he taught me centering prayer, which is a Christian Catholic-based meditation. Where you get a couple words out of the Bible and it's almost like a mantra. And I just loved it. And I loved it so much, like most meditators, I did it twice and then didn't do it again for like 3 years. You know how that goes. And, but I remember that, and that kind of got me started. And I grew up playing a lot of sports in Northeast Ohio, and there was a professional basketball coach who coached the Los Angeles Lakers, and before that the Chicago Bulls, Phil Jackson, who taught Michael Jordan and all these really great athletes how to meditate and do yoga, and he introduced all of these spiritual practices to his basketball team. So for a young athlete in Northeast Ohio who thought he was going to go to the pros in some sport, I took that very seriously, and what happened, I think, psychologically for me, it was like this male priest role model and this basketball coach role model for me as a young boy and then eventually as a man. It was almost like it was okay to explore these kind of practices, and so I just kind of took to them and read Phil Jackson's book and read all kinds of Eastern literature and Buddhism and all of that, along with still practicing my Catholic faith. And over time, in 2008, so eventually I got in politics. I was a state senator. Then in 2002, I ran for the United States Congress. And in 2003, I got sworn into the United States Congress, served there for a while. There's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of stress. And so, again, I learned TM. I did like Zen Mountain Monastery over in New York. I did like a day-long retreat, 2-day retreat there. And again, very powerful experiences of silence that I never continued. And then, you know, you beat yourself up for not doing it. You got that whole aspect of it. And then in 2008, right after the presidential election, I was traveling Ohio. Ohio's a very big political state. New Hampshire's big for the primary and the presidential. Ohio is very big in the general election because it's a swing state. So I would be traveling the state, traveling the country, helping other Congress people, raising money, doing all the political stuff. And right around the summer of 2008, I wasn't burnt out, but I was 35 and I thought, I'm getting too burnt out. I mean, what's worse than a 35-year-old burnt out congressman? Doesn't get much worse than that. So I was determined to try to have a disciplined meditation practice. And I couldn't do it for whatever reason, you know, all kinds of excuses. And I thought to myself, I gotta go on a retreat. Like I've done these 1.5, 2 day ones. I've gotta go on a retreat. So I got on the internet and I found this retreat that was for 5 days. It was at Menla in upstate New York, in the Catskills, and it was by John Kabat-Zinn. Now, John Kabat-Zinn had sent his book, Coming to Our Senses, to every member of Congress. That was funny? For obvious reasons, he said. So I didn't read the whole book, but I read, he had this section in there about the body politic and kind of the manifestation of our own personal stress and anxiety and issues that manifest themselves in the country, which we can see every day on TV. And so I read that part and said, I know this guy. So anyway, I couldn't get it. They were full, so I called, you know, I'm a congressman, so I'm going to call him like, I know you're full, but I'm a congressman, right? And they're like, well, sorry, congressman, we can't let you in. We're in the mindfulness, and that would be unethical, and you're got to stay at home. No, they didn't say that. But I ended up, I don't know what happened, but I got into this retreat, and it was the most amazing 5-day retreat, and it was just, I don't know how many people in here have done a 5-day retreat or not, but it was no phones, no journaling, no TV, just no reading. Like, he didn't want anybody reading. And over the course of the 5 days, he would introduce us to more and more silence. And so we would do a couple hours and then we'd talk about it. Then we would do half a day silence and then we would talk about it. Go to breakfast and literally sit around and no one was talking, which was really weird. Because when you go to breakfast in the cafeteria with 100 people, you start chit-chatting, right? You have a little coffee, a little caffeine buzz going, you start talking. Nobody's talking. And you could feel over the course of those 2 days, you know, a lot of like, where's my phone? Which it wasn't even that bad back then. It's like, where's my BlackBerry? Remember those? Like the rotary phone. And so you could start to feel the anxiety of like, I should be somewhere else, why am I here? And then over the course of a couple of days, you really start to kind of settle in. And I tell people, the first day you want to go home, the second day you want to call your mom and ask her for help. Like, Mom, can you get me out of here? And by the third day, you don't ever want to leave or really talk to anybody ever again the rest of your life. It's like, this is so peaceful. Like, no one's talking to me. This is great. And you start to notice things. And this is what I really, the process for me was you really start to notice as your mind starts to calm down. And I remember sitting in the cafeterias like day 3. So we were getting into deeper and deeper levels of silence, and you're not reading, you're not on your phone, so your mind really starts to settle in. And I remember sitting in the cafeteria for breakfast, and you know, you could hear people screech their chairs, and then you hear the fork and the knife like ding, ding, ding on the dishes. And then I remember sitting there, and I get this nice cup of coffee, and I'm sitting there, and I'm watching the steam come out of the coffee. And I'm watching it, I'm like, wow. You know, it's twirling and spinning. That's unbelievable. Does that happen every time they have a cup of coffee? And you just start noticing these little things you start missing, and then it goes from that noticing and hearing to a deeper noticing and hearing of, you know, we were walking outside, doing walking meditation outside, and it was, and you're in the mountains, and it was November, so the leaves had changed color, and you just start noticing. And I remember it started snowing at one point. You just see the spitting of the snow coming down, like, my God. And I think a bunch of turkeys walk through, and you just start really noticing. And to me, that was a really profound experience, to where I started crying, like at the end of like thinking about all of the things in my life that I didn't notice. You know, I thought of my grandparents, how much time we spent together, how many of those precious little moments that they lived two blocks down from us. We used to ride our bikes down there. And how many of those beautiful little moments was I not completely present for? And that was the kind of the life-changing experience that I had there. I had nephews at that point, and you try to just carry that with you. And that's where I got inspired to have an almost daily, I won't say daily, but almost every day have some meditation practice. Because it's the determination of I don't want to miss my life. And to me, everything else is extra. And so after that retreat, I went up to John, and I kept thinking to myself, because I see the world through a legislator. I see the world as a politician, someone who got into politics to like make big change. And then I experienced this practice of mindfulness, and I thought, man, this is like, you want to talk about transformation, change. You want to talk about changing society. This has got to be where it starts, because it starts with each of us. And I went up to John after, and I'm like, John, and I didn't know him from Adam, other than he was a phenomenal teacher that week. He said the F word twice as he was teaching. And I'm like an old athlete from Northeast Ohio, right? And he said, I won't swear again, don't worry. I may have still some time left, you never know. But he swore, and you know, I'm Catholic, right? We go to church and mass, and I just thought, guy's real. Like it was so deep, and his teachings were so deep, and the experience was so deep, but it was so real. And I just fell in love with him. And I went up to him after, and I was like, John, like, we got to get this stuff, I don't know what to call it, right? I'm like, we got to get this stuff in schools. Like, we've got to get this stuff in the healthcare system. Like, and I was doing a lot of work with veterans, still do today. I was like, we got to get this to veterans. Like, these guys are coming back traumatized. Like, this could be really helpful. And John said, we're doing a ton of research on this. I can introduce you to all these people who are doing work in all of these different fields. And I went and then started meeting the scientists and the educators, and eventually met Rhonda and Judd and all the kind of the rock stars of the mindfulness movement. And that led to the book, The Mindful Nation, because I kept meeting these people. I was like, I got to write a book about this. Now you got to imagine a congressman in 2000. I've been in 8 years. I was in 8 years, and I go to my staff and I say, I'm going to write a book. And they're like, fantastic idea. What are you going to write about? I said, mindfulness meditation. And they said, are you freaking crazy? Because it was not exactly the ideal topic. You know, they're like, write about the unions, and write about workers, and write about this and that. I was like, I'm inspired to write about this. And it was a little bit risky at the time, but I just felt like I wanted to do this. I wanted to get this out and kind of assemble all of the different elements of this practice and how we can use it to transform the country. And so I focused in on education, focused in on healthcare, focused in on helping our veterans. And so this gets us into how do we build out a mindful nation? And how do we develop these practices in our institutions and help use them to transform the institutions that we have now so that they function better. And one of the things that you experience when you practice for a while is you really start to see how things are interconnected. And I would say that, like, underlying, and this is not a political statement necessarily, but the big problem in the country is we're still seeing things in silos. Like, here's your education system, here's your agriculture system, here's your healthcare system, you know, and everything seems to be separate. But the reality of it is that why we can't get it right is because we're not seeing them all as interconnected. And how does the education system feed into the healthcare system? And how does the healthcare system feed into the education system? And how does the food system feed into the health system? How does the food system feed into the education system? When you think about health and wellness and vitality and focus and concentration and all of these interconnections and farming, and what kind of farming practices do we have? So all of these are interconnected. So the underlying approach of creating a mindful nation is how do we start seeing things as interconnected, and how do we start trying to talk about things as being interconnected. And so I'll just share with you a few ideas that I've had and that I'm promoting that I think can help us develop a more mindful nation. One of them starts with education. I think it's fundamental, talking K through 12. How do we get to the heart of the matter, which is another aspect of mindfulness meditation, right? You try to see through all of the clutter and you try to, like, zone in on the root cause of the problem. And so when we talk about education, what's really the root issue? Trauma, right? So many of our kids are coming to school in trauma for a variety of different reasons. It could be economic, it could be domestic violence, it could be sexual violence, it could be any series of any adverse childhood experiences that the kid has. And so we have to have a conversation in the country about moving away from how do we get our test scores up to, my wife's a first grade teacher, so I'm really sucking up to her by saying that, just so we're all on the same page here. She'll ask me, how was New Hampshire? And I'll be able to say, I was talking about you, baby, the whole time. But how do we move away from this conversation of how do we get our test scores up to how do we take care of the trauma? And so how do we have an agenda that says we need a mental health counselor in every school that needs one, at least one? How do we implement art therapy, music therapy, play therapy, these kind of things that just hone right in on the trauma and get these kids to deal with it? How do we have social and emotional learning in every single classroom, where we literally have a part of the curriculum is help kids develop and cultivate awareness? How do we teach kids self-regulation? And how do we help kids? There's also a food component to this, make sure our kids are eating good food in schools. And so by doing this, what we found out with social and emotional learning programs is that if it's a robust program, it's a legit program, what you see is an 11 percentile point increase in test scores. Literally closes the achievement gap. So by focusing on the kid and focusing on the trauma and the skills that they're going to need to have be able to regulate themselves emotionally, to deal with conflict in a healthy and responsible way, to build healthy relationships, what happens? The test scores go up. So let's be a civilized, intelligent, progressive society, not progressive in the political sense, but what's working? And how do we implement that into the agenda in every classroom so that every kid can experience this? And you're going to reduce adverse childhood experiences. You're going to teach kids how to deal with their trauma when they're out of school. And you're going to teach them how to have healthy relationships. So when they go out into the world, they're productive citizens and they're establishing healthy relationships and building strong communities because we've taught them how to do that. And so what's exciting about this, we got it in the school in Warren, Ohio, which is a kind of a Rust Belt town that I represent. I got an earmark to bring money back to get this program implemented. And after 5 years, we saw that they went from 200, I'm gonna mess these numbers up, but it was like 248 out-of-school suspensions to 14 after a few years of getting this thing implemented. They had other things going on, but this was the heart of the reforms that they were putting in the school. And so how are you gonna teach a kid? Well, their butt's gotta be in the seat first and foremost, right? And so these kids would refer themselves to a psychologist, and there was a psychologist, and there was peer mediation like 2 floors down. And of all the kids who went to this peer mediation, I think the superintendent said it was like 50 or 60% were self-referrals. So that shows me that these kids are starting to have a level of awareness of what's going on inside them, that they can raise their hand and say, I got to get out of here, I'm ready to punch Johnny in the mouth, or whatever the scenario is, and I need to get out of here. And instead of old school, when I went to school, probably many of you, can you imagine raising your hand and tell your teacher, I'm getting really angry right now, I'm going to do something really stupid, and I need to leave. And what would they tell you? You stay right there, right? And this is a different way of doing it, that we've got to have this national conversation about this being a better way. Now, so politically, which is always an important thing, how do you do it? Social and emotional learning has the support of the Brookings Institution, which is a very liberal think tank, and the American Enterprise Institute, which is a very conservative think tank. So, holy cow, in the United States of America, in 2019, as we speak, there is a major transformational education issue that actually has the support of both sides. That gets me really excited. Maybe I'm a nerd, but that gets me really excited. But it gets me excited. Go ahead, clap. Is that I'm a nerd you're clapping for, or are you clapping? That gets me really excited because we have a 16-year-old, we have a 15-year-old, and we may not be able to get it done for them, but Brady, our youngest, is 5. And how do we get this done so that Brady, at least half of his educational experience will be in schools that are practicing social and emotional learning and have some of these trauma-informed approaches? That's the sense of urgency I think we need to all carry with us as we leave here, which is could be really, really exciting. And then I think a mindful nation, we've got to get back to the fundamentals. So a guy who works for me and I were out last night in some of the pubs in Concord. Probably know which ones they are because there's not a lot of them there. But they've quadrupled since I went to law school here at Franklin Pierce. I was like, where does downtown come from? But anyway, and he was saying, what would be the couple of things you could do if you were king? You could just wave a magic wand. And I obviously said it'd be nice to get everybody to meditate in some way, some contemplative practice. And the other thing was, we've got to deal with our food issue, right? So a mindful nation, to me, is about seeing the whole field, seeing how things are really interconnected. And I believe that if we're going to hit one point that can actually have, in the military they call it a force multiplier, like you spend $1 here and you get $5 or $10 worth of impact, is dealing with the food system. And you can't deal with the food system until you deal with the agriculture system. And so, how does this tie into mindfulness? How does this tie into health and well-being? We're starting to see now the connection between, this is not what you came here to hear, but our gut bacteria, we call it the microbiome, and how we have disturbed the microbiome with eating highly processed foods, and a lot of stress has messed up our natural microbiome. Now, this is another thing my staff has told me, don't ever talk about gut bacteria. So you can tell I don't listen to my staff at all. And so we're noticing and getting more and more information and data on how that messing up, and causing an imbalance in our microbiome is causing mental health issues. It's causing issues around depression and other things, because this balance that we've had for tens of thousands of years of eating like normal food to eating very highly processed food. We like to call it fake food or Franken food, Dr. Mark Hyman calls it. That's really not real. And what we've done to the soil is we've poured so many oil-based pesticides on it that you literally have to eat like 7 carrots today to get the same amount of nutrition of eating 1 carrot 30 years ago, because of the nutrients we've taken out of the soil. So again, mindfulness, seeing everything connected, mental health issues, how are our kids going to learn, how are we going to move forward in a positive way? We've got to address the issue of how we grow our food. So like, this is like pretty fundamental stuff, right? We're going to take care of our kids' trauma. We got to take care of the soil and the food we eat. And like, this, I think, is the political agenda. You know, this is the agenda for the country. So we have to move from industrial agriculture that uses tons of pesticides and uses tons of herbicides and fungicides, and we've destroyed the soil. So there's a technique, a farming technique called regenerative agriculture, that you can dramatically reduce pesticides. The whole goal is to build the soil health, okay? And it has numerous benefits to it. I know you didn't come here to think you were going to hear something about soil, but I want you to leave here thinking, how is all this stuff, you know, interconnected? And so if we take care of the soil, that we will have more nutrition in the soil. It actually sequesters carbon because you don't till it. You just leave the old crops on the ground. You plant new ones in the fall, and you leave them on the ground, and you take carbon out of the air, and it just builds into the soil. So you're sequestering carbon into the soil. And then it increases organic matter. And so for every 1% increase in organic matter in an acre of farmland, it holds another 25,000 gallons of water. So it builds the soil resiliency for drought and flooding. So we saw the floods in the Midwest in this last summer, screwed up all these farmers' ability to plant. Why? The ground is like this hardwood floor up here. And so you have to fill the ground with fertilizer. And so when the rains come, the water doesn't go into the ground. It takes the fertilizer and pushes it into the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, goes down to the Gulf of Mexico, and kills 220,000 metric tons of fish every single year. 220,000 metric tons of fish in this dead zone. And we're trying to get healthy protein, everybody in the country, and we're killing fish, and they said there's 20 or 25 of these dead zones all around the world because of those agricultural practices that we have. So we can move to a technique that sequesters carbon, cleans the water, builds soil resiliency, and allows us to actually grow healthy food that doesn't have a lot of pesticides on it and is damaged. And that's the food we want our kids to eat, right? When we think about this in the context of our kids, and we think of this in the context of diseases that we have, this is how we do it. Last thing I'm going to talk about is our healthcare system. This is a biggie, as you know. So I won't talk about health insurance, because that's a whole other animal, other than to say I believe everybody in the country should have accessible, affordable health care. Right? But for our purposes here today, we have to recognize that about 3/4, between 2/3 and 3/4 of our healthcare costs in the United States are for chronic diseases that are largely preventable. Okay? You want to talk about dumb. This is dumb, right? There's no other way to say it. If you look at the expenditures, it's about $3.5 trillion a year 3.5 trillion with a T a year we spend on chronic diseases that are preventable. And we're trying to figure out, how do we invest in early childhood? How do we balance the budget? How do we invest in education? How do we invest in the research? How do we get our economy going? And we're blowing $3.5 trillion a year on chronic diseases that are largely preventable, like heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes is the biggie. So what's a mindful nation do when you look at this problem, right? How do we stop it? What's the root cause? We talked about food, talked about stress. How do we fix this? We create incentives in the program. So right now we have like a disease care system. It's like we wait till everybody gets really sick, and then we dump a bunch of money into it. Like, let's say it all together, that's dumb, right? I'm going to get you all saying dumb. And you go home and tell your kids, don't say dumb. It's dumb. Okay? And we waste a lot of money doing it, and people are sick, right? So how do we, and all the incentives are for that, right? The help from the health companies, in the pharmaceutical industry, like, get sick, here we go, spend a bunch of money. How do we build a system that sees all this stuff as interconnected and flip the incentives to reward doctors and patients to get and stay healthy? And you're seeing this in bits and pieces around the country now, where you get rebates and refunds if you go to the gym 3 days a week and you wear your Fitbit, right? The whole system's got to look that way. So how do we do it? You know, you build those incentives in, but there are things out there in the world now, like using food as medicine. You heard about this? So this is happening around the country in little pockets here or there again, where we could literally reverse type 2 diabetes using food, other interventions, but food, and where you can spend like $5,000, between $5,000 and $10,000, depending on the program, literally buying healthy food, thousands of dollars in healthy food for people, and get it with other interventions, and reverse over the course of months, within a year or two, reversing type 2 diabetes, where it costs $14,000 a year to just manage type 2 diabetes for the rest of your life. So if you're looking and seeing clearly, because you're all doing your meditations, right? You're seeing clearly what the problem is, you're finding the root cause of the problem, and then you build a system around addressing the root cause of the problem. To me, it looks a lot like using food as medicine. And you're growing the food in a healthy way, and you're using with high nutritional value because you're building the soil and getting the nutrition in there. And you're applying this food to the healthcare system, and you're using that food in our schools, and you begin to reverse type 2 diabetes. Now, I was in Iowa campaigning a few months ago, and I'm giving this little riff about food as medicine. And I'm in Iowa, like rural Iowa, like in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. And this woman sitting across from me, and she stopped me. And she said, I got into this program just randomly. She says, I was dying. I was way overweight. I had congestive heart failure. I had all these issues. And she said, I somehow got referred to this program that you're talking about. And I said, well, what happened? She goes, I lost 90 pounds, and I'm off of like 12 of my prescription drugs. And she was so proud of herself. She says, I have one more drug I got to get off of. She says, I've reversed my type 2 diabetes by 80%. This is in rural Iowa, and she was just lucky she got into the program. So the point is, this is working. This is like, we're not making this stuff up. And again, politically, like, who's against this, right? Like, you got to be really off the reservation to like not think that this is like a really good idea for us in the long term. When you're looking at saving hundreds of billions of dollars that we could otherwise reinvest into more productive uses in the country, to me, this all makes sense. And, you know, again, how do we treat our kids in our schools? Here's a really good one for you. I was at a school a couple months ago. My wife, again, is a first grade teacher, so I do a lot of work in schools. And I go in the morning, and the kids at the breakfast, I'm walking through the breakfast, they're eating their breakfast, publicly funded by you and me. Their breakfast is, guess, chocolate milk, okay, and a Rice Krispie treat. Thank you. I'm glad you feel the same way I do. So, you know, I learned that a teaspoon of sugar is 4 grams, so there's like this easy way to like do the math on it, so you can turn something and look at how many grams of sugar in something, and you do the math of how many teaspoons it is. And it was like 20-some grams in the chocolate milk, right? So it was like high 26, 28, right? 7 teaspoons of pure white sugar we're giving to our kids. And then the Rice Krispie treat was, I don't know, you could probably go out and find one. It was like 40 or 50 grams, something like that. It was crazy, high numbers. I'm just thinking, who would do this? It's like child abuse. Like, think about it. Like, who in their right mind would give their kid 20 teaspoons of white sugar before they walked into the classroom? My wife gets all upset about this because they do this at lunch sometimes, and they get a Slurpee or slushy. So then they come back to my classroom, and I can't control them, right? So not only is it unhealthy for them, it ruins the learning environment. And so here's the kicker. Here's what drives people crazy about politics and government and inefficiencies and all this stuff. We all paid for that, right? So in this school I was at, I guarantee you that at least 80% of the kids in this school were probably on the Medicaid program, right? Where we help make sure every kid that's poor in the country has health care, which we're all in agreement that we should do that. So how long does it take for this kid to get type 2 diabetes, you think? Because we're going to feed them that breakfast or her that breakfast for like their entire time in school. And they're in school from age this to that. You're talking about a decade, 12 years, 13 years. And then they get diabetes. So how dumb is this? We buy this food with highly processed food with a lot of sugar in it, and we feed it to them that ruins their ability to focus and concentrate. And then we have them in the Medicaid program, so when they get type 2 diabetes, we're going to pay a bunch extra, the extra 14 grand a year to start dealing with their diabetes. Bad idea? Yes, yes. So again, seeing all of this is interconnected. And I just believe that, you know, mindful nation to me in healing America means like, let's get out of this who's on the left and who's on the right. Where are we? It's a big thing. I'm a Democrat. It's a big thing with the Democrats. And I was like, are you left? Are you center left? Are you socialist? Communist? Like, what are you? I'm like, I don't know. I'm for solving problems, right? I'm for like getting people together to solve problems. And again, like when you look at regenerative agriculture, again, this is the political piece. How are you going to get it done? There are Republican and libertarian farmers who don't think that climate change is caused by man, who want to practice regenerative agriculture because they want to heal the soil. And they want to practice old school farming. And they can make money off it because they don't have to buy all the pesticides and all the fertilizer because they're building nutrition within the soil. So the farmers are making money. They're sequestering carbon, which deals with your climate issue, if you're interested in reversing climate change. And they're making money. Like, okay, so now we have social and emotional learning with American Enterprise Institute and the Brookings Institution. Like, we could move on that, both sides. Regenerative agriculture, Republican, libertarian farmers who don't believe that climate change is caused by man can join with liberals who want to reverse climate change, who do think climate change is caused by man, and are interested in healthy food and getting rid of pesticides. And so we can move on that. And so a mindful nation is about us trying to become more conscious, more aware, letting go of You know, it's all these terms that we use in our practice, right? Like letting go. Letting go. You have a thought, touch it. You know, John used to say, poke it with your awareness. It'll pop like a soap bubble, right? Pop those thoughts. Reflect enough to see our conditioning around these issues. And one of the things why I like bringing up these issues is because people don't have a position on it, right? Here's Congressman Ryan talking about regenerative agriculture. You know what most people say? What's regenerative agriculture? And I'm like, this is perfect, because that means you don't have a preconceived position on regenerative agriculture that you read on your particular Facebook stream or your particular news channel that you want to watch, whatever side it is. You're going to be open to what we're talking about. And so I keep saying it's not about left or right, it's about new and better. And I think as we get into, I think a mindful nation is a new and better nation. And it's about letting go of all of this garbage, all of the past. Look at the problem, try to solve it. See it clearly. Go to the root cause. And know that you've got to work with others, have healthy relationships, healthy dialogue that can help bring that to fruition. I'll just say one last thing. I do a lot. I used to do more of these before I got married and had kids and could, got more involved in my job. But I would go to a lot of these conferences, maybe yogis, meditators, people with crystals, They got mad at me one time because I said, you can't change the country with crystals. You gotta, and a couple of them got mad at me, but I don't know what to say. And I would go, and it was like people would sit on the cushion, and some teachers would say, or some students would say, I want to, like yogi students, I want to become one with the universe, right? Well, I think we're already one with the universe, we're all connected. And they'd say, I want to become one with the universe, but politics, I don't want to do that. It's too negative, it's too this, it's too that. And my response always was, you can't be one with the universe and be disconnected from politics. And I know it's hard, this is my pitch, not for anything in particular, but just in general. If you're going to switch the education system, you got to be involved. If you want to switch the agriculture system, you've got to be involved in the policies that are creating this. You can't just shop at Whole Foods and think you're solving some of these problems, because it's not going to work. You've got to be engaged. You've got to run for school board. So that, imagine what a really energetic group of people could do in a school district around social and emotional learning and the food your kids are going to eat. I mean, you want to talk about transforming your kid's school or the school district that you live in? And I just feel like if you do those two things, everything else is going to, you probably need vocational training or, something for the workforce. But if you do those two things, you will have made a huge contribution to helping enlighten our society and really solve some really big problems. And people are going to talk about you and they're going to say nasty things, but who cares? Let it go. Pop it like a soap bubble. Let it go, My wife says all the time, how do you put up with this stuff? I said, I don't pay any attention to it. If there's something valuable that, is some good advice, people tell you things all the time that you don't want to hear that they're kind of right. My wife, for example, tells me all the time. And she's normally right. Mason was doing something the other day. He says, why is she telling me what to do all the time? About his mom. Mason's our oldest. And I said, Mason, just listen to her, because 90% of the time, she's absolutely right. That's what I do. So he's like, I noticed. But, take the insight, there's insight there, and let go of the negativity if you don't need it. Negativity can inform you, fear can inform you, anger can inform you. It's just kind of like when you talk about sitting on the cushion and you want to be one with the universe, but try to disconnect. Even fear, and I'm sure some of our other speakers will touch upon this, even fear and anger inform you, right? There's something in there that's got a lot of energy that can really teach you something. And that's the kind of thing we want to teach our kids. And then how to process that in a healthy way. And why are we so dysfunctional as a country right now? Because we don't know how to process our fear and our anger. And we don't know how to give it some kind of context. And so I just hope that this gathering here and what's happening here on this campus is going to continue to contribute to try to bring some enlightenment to our society today. I will just end saying this to all of you, that this is not going to be easy. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to meditate and like all my problems are going to go away, or we're going to fix all the problems in our society. And I'll just end with a great quote that Bobby Kennedy used to use at the end of his campaign, a brief campaign for president. He would say, I do not promise you ease. I do not promise you comfort. But I will promise you these. I'll promise you weariness. I'll promise you hardship. And I'll promise you sacrifice. And with these, I'll promise you victory. And if we do the tough work together, we're going to get there. But we've got to be smart. We've got to have a really good strategy built around awareness, self-regulation, tolerance, letting go of the negativity, and we will build the kind of society that we want. We've got to heal first, heal the trauma that we all have, all throughout our society, and then build. Heal, build. And if we do it together, we will have victory. Thank you so much.
So, what I'm struck, I mean, there was a lot of food for thought in that one presentation. We could almost call it a day at that point. But other people drove a long way or flew a long way to be here and have equally important things to say. So I'm introducing Judson Brewer next. And he was the Director of Research at the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts. And now he's the Director of Research and Innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center. He studies meditation and the brain, and in particular uses that information, that knowledge, to help people manage and overcome addiction and unproductive habits. And one of the things that occurred to me, I don't know if maybe this would come through in your talk anyway, but some of what Tim was talking about, I think, relies on, he even used the term, self-regulation. Right? So in order to be not dumb in some ways, right, to make good decisions for ourselves, we need to regulate our behavior in ways that we might not, might require a little bit more effort and insight. And I think that meditation, mindfulness helps us to gain that insight. And so the work that Judd and his colleagues are doing, using mindfulness to help people overcome addiction and habits, I think fades right into a lot of what Tim was talking about. And Judd has written a book also called The Craving Mind, which is also available here at Gibson's table. And some of you may have seen already some of his TED Talks. They've been viewed by millions. And one of the things that stuck with me from one of your TED Talks was he talks about how, for instance, if someone wants to quit smoking, they don't right away start by saying, you just need to stop smoking, it's not good for you, etc. But they encourage people to turn directly toward the experience of smoking. Like, what does that actually feel like, right? And often people realize it's not really pleasant, actually. And it drives that internal motivation to make change. And so that turning directly toward your experience and feeling it for what it is, not what you think it is, think it should be, want it to be, hope it to be, etc., in my mind is a key aspect of mindfulness, and it's inspiring to see people like Judd using that component of mindfulness in the ways that they are. So once again, we're lucky to have the next speaker with us, and so here's Judson Brewer.
as this gets started, Kim just reminded me of a great story, actually. I went down to visit him in DC when we were first prototyping our smoking app called Craving to Quit. I was talking to Tim about it, and Tim got this wild look in his eye. You can probably imagine this just from his point. And he looks around and he goes, because I was like, this app, and he's like, and he goes, hey you! And he grabs one of his workers and he goes, you smoke, don't you? And the kid, he's like, oh God, what did I do? And he comes in and he goes, Judd's got this new app. You don't have to quit smoking or anything, but just try it out. Tell me if it's any good. And I get an email from the kid. It was either, I don't remember, 2, 3, 4 weeks later. And he, I remember this because I was at a conference or something in a hotel. And it was a Saturday morning. And I get this short email from him. And he goes, I wasn't going to quit, but I tried your app and actually quit smoking. Tears start streaming down my face. This is the first person actually that I knew of that had quit smoking. It was just a prototype of our app at that point. So I have to say, hats off to you for helping encourage this. And Tim just mentioned the guy is still quit. That was probably 6 years ago. A long time ago. Yeah. So it's amazing. So I'll talk about some of that stuff. Let's just get through some of the business points. So I've been fortunate enough with this app to work with a small startup company in my lab. You can read all the disclosures from Brown. But actually, more importantly than that, I have to disclose something else. Probably obvious to you. I'm a white male. But it's really amazing how there are these unknown unknowns. There are all these things that I didn't know until I started learning about them. And so I think it's really important that all of us really look into these things that we don't know. There was a study that just came out 3 years ago, 2016, where they looked at medical students and residents, and they found that 50% of them still held beliefs, like black people had thicker skin than white people, and that they had a different pain tolerance, and that actually affected their medical judgment. They were actually doing the wrong thing much more with folks that held these beliefs. So I'm really going to encourage everybody to look to see what you don't know that you don't know. And I think Rhonda is really one of the folks leading the charge with this. Here are a couple of resources that I found very helpful. This podcast out of Duke, Seeing White, was amazing. So I just want to, that's my real disclosure. Now, I'm an addiction psychiatrist, so behavior change is really on my mind. And we can look to see how we're doing as a nation with helping people with addiction. So for example, how are we doing with the opioid crisis? Not so well. Starting to turn it around a little bit, but hugely problematic. You can see these are just the overdose deaths. Tim was mentioning this. Obesity is at epidemic proportions. Purple, not good. Over the course of 30 years, our country has gone to a crazily obese nation. So what do? Well, medical school I learned some facts, like, if you want to lose weight, just make sure you have more calories out than calories in. That is true. But clearly my professors hadn't been in the clinic in a while. Because when we go and just tell our patients that, I know that, I just can't do it. And so what I'm going to talk about today is what don't we know about our minds? And can we actually learn something about our minds so that if we know how our minds work, we can start to work with our minds? So I'll start with also a true story. I like someone was talking about his beginnings with meditation. Actually, my wife practices centering prayer. Really great practice. 10 years into my meditation practice, I was still sitting on cushions, sweating, gritting my teeth, trying to concentrate. 10 years in, I remember being on a silent retreat in Massachusetts in December. It's kind of cold in Massachusetts in December, as you all know. I would sweat through t-shirts, working so hard trying to concentrate. I'm not kidding. And the room was not warm. I didn't know how my mind worked. And what I'm going to say and suggest is that because I didn't know how my mind worked, there's no way I was going to be able to work with it. And I love this quote attributed to Einstein, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it, right? So I was this, overachieving, work hard in college so I can get into medical school, work hard in medical school so that I can get into residency, work. So I thought when I started meditating, it was actually my first day of medical school, I thought, well, I'll just work. I'll just do this. And that's how I approached it for 10 years. Now, I was using my kind of cognitive control, my willpower part of my brain called the prefrontal cortex, which I later learned is the weakest part of our brain. It's the first part of our brain that goes offline when we get stressed out. There's this acronym that I learned in residency called HALT. It's an acronym that we teach to our patients and say, hey, danger zone. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Those are things that are more likely to put us in a position where we might relapse. We can see this. Some of these are mushed together. You've all heard the term hangry. This is when we are apt to do something that we're going to later regret. And what I would suggest is because we don't know how our brains work, we don't know how our minds work. And what I'm also going to suggest is the answer is actually right in front of our faces and has been for a long time. So I'll tell you a couple of, some highlights for some of the research. There's a guy named B.F. Skinner. Okay, he was really interested in studying animal behavior. He became famous studying pigeons, as you can see here. He just wanted to know how animals behave, what made them tick, so to speak. He found that he could actually teach a pigeon to win a cross-court shot in ping pong for a food reward. Okay, wait for it. There it is. So he came up with this theory called operant conditioning, positive negative reinforcement, that was actually a really nice explanation for how we learn. And I'm going to show you a Weight Watchers commercial that speaks to this. It's the instant replay.
If you're happy and you know it, eat a snack. If you're happy and you know it, eat a snack. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, eat a snack. If you're sad and you know it, eat a snack. Sad and you know it, eat a snack. If you're sad because you think you're feeling down or generally bad, if you're sad, eat a snack. Bored and you know it, eat a snack. If you're lonely and you know it, eat a snack. If you're sleepy and you know it, if you're guilty and you know it, if you're stressed, eat a snack. If you're human and you know it, eat your feelings, eat a snack.
Boom. Yeah. If you're human, eat your feelings. I was thinking at the end of Tim's talk, we're really good at processing food, but not very good at processing emotions. That's what you're talking about. So I was at a conference a little while ago with the new CEO of Weight Watchers, and I said to her, this is an amazing commercial, but I hadn't seen it. I'm guessing not many of you have seen this commercial. She said it almost bankrupted the company, this commercial campaign that they had. Somebody else high up in their company, I was asking about this. She said, oh yeah, it makes people depressed. But they nailed it. What they nailed was what Skinner was talking about, which is basically this process called positive negative reinforcement. Something feels good, we celebrate, like you saw in the commercial, and then we have an urge to eat something, we eat dessert, and then this lays down this memory that says, oh, do that again, do that again, do that again. Or we lose the game, we're the losing team, and our brain says, oh, that was terrible, and our coach says, I'll give you some food to make you feel better. And we start to learn, oh, when I feel sad, I should eat food. So this same process that has been around forever, to help us survive, has actually been co-opted to do things like help us learn to eat food when we're stressed or whatever. In fact, as an addiction psychiatrist, understanding how this process works was really, really helpful for me to understand how my patients were struggling. Instead of just telling them, you know, okay, you're addicted to cocaine, well, just stop. Yeah, it doesn't work very well, right? You want to quit smoking, we'll give you some medication to help with the withdrawal, but just quit cold turkey. It doesn't work that way. So what do? Oh, well, we can avoid cues, which makes sense. You know, in working with people with alcoholism, there's this saying, people, places, and things. If you avoid people and places and things, you're less likely to drink. My patients, of course, say, duh. But you can see mechanistically how that fits in. With smoking, it's a little harder to avoid all those cues, so there are these things like substitution behaviors, eat candy instead of smoking. The problem with these, and our success rates are abysmally low, you saw that the opioid epidemic that we have, is that they don't actually dismantle this core loop. Now, I'll point out that this process is so well known that Eric Kandel got the Nobel Prize showing that it's evolutionarily conserved all the way back to the sea slug. So mechanistically, it seems like this is a good place to start paying attention, to start looking. You know, this is like the regenerative agriculture of psychology and psychiatry. This is, you know, if we actually know a lot about how our minds work, why don't we start actually working with them? And we can actually distill it down to some really key processes. Some key elements. You need a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. So, see food, you eat the food, and then this dopamine signal comes from our stomach to our brain that says, remember what you ate and where you found it. So it actually helps lay down memory so we can find food. You can see how this also works with survival. You see the saber-toothed tiger, whatever, that's chasing you. You run away, that's the behavior. And then you live to remember, okay, don't go back to that part of the forest because it's kind of dangerous. So we actually know a whole lot about how our minds work. And in fact, the food industry knows a whole lot about how our minds work. There's this great expose in the New York Times from years ago now. I highly recommend it. This is one of the required read things in my class at Brown, where they really talk about all the different ways that we can manipulate things. I wouldn't call this food, to make them addictive. I love how they use the Dorito because it is engineered to be the perfect everything, you know, size, shape, crunch, taste, mouthfeel, whatever. In my favorite peer-reviewed journal, The Onion, they had a headline that says, Dorito celebrates its 1 millionth ingredient, right? Because this is not food, folks, this is not food. Social media, same thing. It's engineered for the likes and the retweets, you know, to the point where we become these pigeons pressing levers. So somebody knows how our minds work. It's just that we haven't been clued in. All right, so I'm going to give you a summary slide in case you didn't quite get it in this part of the talk. Poor Cookie Monster. So, the good news, okay, that's it. I have no, okay, good luck. No, as Tim pointed out, there is hope. There is something that we can do. So, I mean, you're all here because of this conference. So I'm sure you're very familiar with different definitions of mindfulness. I like this simple one that John Patterson put forward, paying attention in the present moment, on purpose, and non-judgmentally. So as a scientist, I can look at this definition and can say, okay, how does this fit mechanistically? How does this fit with the mechanism of how our minds work? Now, it's not about avoiding things, right? It's about being with things. It's not about substituting something else, you know, like ridding ourselves of our thoughts or going to our happy place. It's about learning to process emotions, like you heard Tim talking about. So we think of this as driving this wedge of awareness in so that we can skillfully respond, you know, and have the space to respond rather than habitually react. Because the more we do these things habitually, the less we're aware, the more we're automatons. I'll give you an example. One of my patients had been smoking 40 years. He wanted to quit smoking. So we calculated this out. Pack of cigarettes, 20 cigarettes a day for 40 years. Guess how many times he had reinforced that habit loop? Ready? 293,000. So to come to him as his physician and say, okay, just stop. His brain was like, I'm going to find somebody else because you clearly don't know what you're talking about, right? But he didn't know how his mind worked. He tried everything, but he couldn't, that thing had been reinforced 293,000 times. He didn't know how his mind worked. So we started with, okay, let's help you understand how your mind works. Now, it might seem strange, and we started actually with just bringing awareness in to the process of smoking. And it might seem really crazy that bringing awareness to our behavior will actually help. How does that actually help change behavior? In one of our first studies with smoking cessation, we actually randomized people to get mindfulness training or gold standard treatment. And the first night they came in and we said, go ahead and smoke. And they looked at me like, okay, is this the test? Like what's going on here? I said, no, just pay attention as you smoke and see what happens. Here's an example of what somebody noticed. The person said, Michael, smoking smells like stinky cheese and tastes like chemicals. Yeah. Now this is really, really critical. Okay, if you've learned nothing else today from this piece, it is this. Reward-based learning is not based on behavior. Right? If we change behavior based on behavior, then if I said stop using cocaine, people would stop. Stop overeating, people would stop. It doesn't work. Reward-based learning is based on rewards. Rewards are what drive future behavior. It's how rewarding the behavior is. And what this person pointed out, the smells like stinky cheese piece, helped her see that smoking wasn't actually that great. And so that reward value dropped. So her brain became less excited to smoke in the future. I love this quote from Yogi Berra. You can observe a lot just by watching. Now, I'm not going to go into the details because we published this first study a while ago, but basically we got 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment by having people pay attention as they smoke, and then use mindfulness training to help them work with their cravings. So, wow, we were pretty impressed with that. I don't have time to get into the mechanistic piece, but I'm happy to talk about that afterwards, about how it was working. I'll just summarize it. What we actually found was that indeed mindfulness training was helping people be with their cravings, not only see the lack of reward in the smoking, which helped them be motivated to work with the smoking, but at the same time wanted to see the cravings were just made up of sensations, of feelings, of thoughts, and this and that, and that they could actually be with those elements rather than that overarching huge thing that felt like it was going to get them out of patient who came in and said, "Doc, I feel like my head's going to explode if I don't smoke." And we just unpacked it. Well, what does head exploding feel like? Tightness, tension, burning, this. And each of those elements he could work with. But the head exploding piece was too much. So as we broke it down and helped him work with that through these mindfulness practices, he could actually work with it. So what we're seeing mechanistically is that mindfulness can actually decouple this loop rather than treat around it. Now, as we were developing the smoking program, we were pretty impressed with, we weren't expecting to see results that were that strong. And then I started thinking, this process is set up to help us learn things in context. It's set up to help us develop context-dependent memory. Now, my patients don't come to my clinic and learn to smoke in my clinic. This is not a smoking clinic like I'm going to help you smoke. It's a smoking clinic to help you work with that habit. So I started thinking, well, how could I actually bring my clinic to them and help them work in context so that they could actually benefit from it more? So at that time, look out my window. I was at the VA hospital and see people out, somebody's out in the parking lot with a cigarette in one hand, with their other hand. Right? They're laughing of mass distraction. So he said, well, why don't we actually put the programming into their phones and see what happens? So we started developing these app-based mindfulness training programs. This one for smoking that Tim's colleague was one of the first to test out. We developed one for eating and one even for anxiety. Now you might think, how is anxiety a habit? And I'll give you an example from a patient that I'm working with. He was referred to me for anxiety. When he came in, he looked really anxious. He was actually he came in also 180 pounds overweight. When I started getting his history, he said, I actually can't drive on the highway anymore because I have these thoughts like, oh no, I'm in this, as he literally put it, I'm in this bullet driving 60 miles an hour down the highway and something could happen. So he'd have these thoughts that were really upsetting, and so he'd start worrying, and then he would stop driving so he could avoid those situations, and so to the point where he couldn't drive on the highway at all anymore. Now, in fact, as we start to learn that worrying isn't actually that rewarding, our brains start to sometimes even get into these spirals of worry and anxiety. The worry thinking that was there to help us, solve the problem or avoid or fix something actually is unpleasant itself, and then it feeds on its own anxiety. So I'll say more about him in a minute, but I just want to highlight, we were really trying to figure out how we could package these trainings into bite-sized pieces. So we started, and this is an example of how these programs work. We can cut these manualized trainings into bite-sized pieces. We can deliver, mindfulness training, help people understand how their minds work, 10 minutes a day, so it's something that they can do. They don't have to set aside an hour, get childcare, come to a clinic, and all this stuff. We can use animations to help make sure that these programs are engaging. We can do in-the-moment exercises. Like I said, where they are struggling, like in the kitchen if they're working with eating, in their before outside of work or wherever they're working with smoking or whatever. And then importantly, as a scientist, we can embed things like experience sampling so we can study this. And also, we can pair these with online communities because community is really, really critical for any type of behavior change. I'll give you an example of what this looks like. We actually worked with a couple of animators who both quit smoking using mindfulness. Here's how we're explaining how craving works.
Today we're going to explain cravings through the metaphor of a screaming child. I know you've heard and seen a child throwing a tantrum. Perhaps for some of you, it was your own child. This child is screaming because he wants something. And you as the parent want him to stop screaming. All your child wants is a lollipop. So in this metaphor, think of your cravings as the child's tantrum. The lollipop is like the cigarettes. But what should you do? Yell at the child? That might make things worse. Gag the child? That will stop the screaming in the short term, but you know what will happen as soon as you take the gag away. You could just give him a lollipop. Congratulations! You just taught your child to scream for lollipops. In other words, you just taught him that screaming is a good way to get what he wants. What might you do instead? Here's a novel concept. Just let him scream himself out. What? Have you ever seen a child scream forever? Sometimes they scream so hard and so long that you think their head, or your head, might explode. But it never does. What happens instead? Eventually, the child gets tired and stops.
So, first thing I want to point out here is I'm not advocating child abuse or children. If their diaper needs to be changed, if they're hungry, if they need a nap. If we're paying attention, we can actually meet their needs. But if we're not, to develop this Eat Right Now program, because I hadn't had an experience with eating before, and that's what helped me actually learn to see that this process, and go back and look at the process that was actually set up to help us eat. So I'll give you an example of somebody that I've been working with in my clinic. When we first started developing this eating program and using mindfulness to help people work with eating. She's a woman who's about 30 years of age, who was very at a very unhealthy weight when she came in to see me. And what she described was that her mom had been emotionally abusing her. Tim was talking about adverse childhood event. She had had quite a few adverse childhood events. But what she learned at a very young age was that if she ate food, as she described it, she could numb herself. By the time she came to see me, she was eating entire large pizzas in one sitting, 20 out of 30 days a month. She met all the criteria for binge eating disorder. Now you can see, she didn't know what to do. She had no control over eating. She would And so she came in, just wondering what the heck she could do. Now you can see if we just map this out mechanistically, that the triggers, the negative emotions, she was binge eating, and then she would get this brief relief, as she described it. She could numb herself. She really had no idea how her mind worked, to the point where she would do these echo habit loops, where she would binge, and then she'd feel terrible about binging, and her brain would say, oh, negative emotion, let's binge. And so sometimes she would binge multiple times in a row because she was that out of control and she had no idea what was going on. Long story short, we developed this eRight program and started doing some research to see if it could actually help people work with their cravings. And this was a study led by Ashley Mason at UCSF, where we looked to see if we could reduce those craving-related eating. We got a 40% reduction in craving-related eating and a 35% reduction in eating to cope with negative emotions. So this is really great to see. Not only that we could develop an app to help people manage emotional eating, but from a mechanistic standpoint, we're starting to see similar mechanisms between smoking, where people could have an urge to smoke and not smoke. And here, folks could have an urge to eat and not eat. So we were starting to see a triangulation process where mindfulness is actually working in the same way with different behaviors. And this is really helpful because you never know if it's a fluke with a study or whether something's actually working or not. But if we see this working with smoking, we see this working with eating, it gives us more confidence that this might actually be one of the core mechanisms of how mindfulness helps people change behavior. Now, as we were developing this eating program, people were starting to map out some of their own habit loops around eating, and a number of them commented that they would actually eat because they were stressed or anxious, which led us to look into that whole bit about anxiety being a habit loop unto itself. So we developed this app for anxiety called Unwinding Anxiety, and then we looked to the most difficult patient population I could think of to work with. It's like physicians, we are a pain in the ass. Why? Well, in medical school, we don't learn how to regulate our emotions. What we learn to is stuff them down. It's like, oh, you shouldn't need to sleep. Stay up all night. You shouldn't need to eat. You shouldn't need, it's like we're held to these superhuman levels. Can you tell me, I'm sure you've watched television shows about physicians. How many times have you ever seen a physician go to the bathroom? That's right. They don't even let us go to the bathroom. Like, you should be taking care of patients. Why are you wasting your time going to the bathroom? So by the time folks get out of residency and into practice for a while, and then have to deal with all the healthcare mess, they get burnt out pretty easily. So we said, okay, let's just see if we can get physicians to try this program. So we did a feasibility study at UMass. And in fact, it was the easiest study that I'd ever recruited for. The CEO of the hospital system sent out a single email, and we recruited all the people that we needed for the study, which is not great. It's great for us, for recruitment, but it's not a good sign if you think of it as taking the temperature of the healthcare system, with physicians being a vital part of that. So I'll just go through this quickly. We just wanted to see, we screened for anxiety. They had to be a little anxious to be. That was no problem for the study. We just wanted to see if people had used the program and if their anxiety went down. We also threw in a couple of burnout questions, and I'll tell you why we did that in a minute. Now, why is this important at baseline? About 2/3 of these folks had moderate to severe anxiety. About half of them said they felt burnt out. About a quarter of them said they felt burnt out daily. And about a third of them said they felt that they become more callous toward folks. Imagine having your doctor come in to see you, and they're not making good connection. They're emotionally exhausted. How good of a job are they going to do? So long story short, we just submitted this for publication, but basically we got a 50% reduction in anxiety symptoms after 3 months. Actually, it was 57% at 3 months. And I don't have a slide for this, but we also found a 50% reduction in burnout in some of the sub-measures of burnout that we looked at. And it's because anxiety and burnout are highly correlated. We found a 0.7 correlation, our value is 0.7 between those two. So as people were learning to work with their anxiety, they were also naturally reducing some aspects of their burnout because the two were highly linked, simply by learning mindfulness, a couple of minutes a day. So what I would suggest is that I gave you some examples of the smoking programs, I gave you some examples of eating, and even with anxiety. As we train people to see how their minds work, to understand how their minds work, that they could actually start to work with their minds, and they were actually showing very, very, what we call face valid or clinically significant results. Like a 57% reduction in anxiety. If that were a drug, that would be a blockbuster drug. So I'll just quickly go through, we think of this as 3 steps of habit change that we're starting to see pretty consistently with these 3 programs. And it's actually relatively straightforward. The first step is actually mapping out these habit loops, becoming aware. What it helps people do, and I've done this so many times in a 5-minute conversation, the first time I see a patient is they tell me their history and I say, okay, let me make sure I got this right. So, your anxiety, I'm thinking of a patient now, your anxiety was triggering you to drink, which then helped you numb yourself out. And they would nod and say, yes, that's it. And, I never thought of it that way before. So this light bulb goes on for them. They can see what's happening in their own mind, and it actually helps us develop a relationship because they see that I'm listening and I understand. And it's also really important for me because if I don't understand what's actually happening, it's going to be harder for me to work with them. So the first step is actually mapping out these habit loops, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. Second step is exploring the results of the behavior, and we'll talk about why that's important in a moment. Simple questions like, what do I get from this experientially? And then the third step is bringing in mindfulness training. So let's go through these one by one. Recognizing habit loops. So as I mentioned, we have these online communities where people can keep journals, they can support each other, and so I can go on there and see how folks are doing. Here's an example from somebody's journal. She wrote, I understand why I go to food, to avoid or cover up or distract from uncomfortable feelings such as anger, sadness, or restlessness. Who wants to feel those? Trigger, uncomfortable feeling. Behavior, eat something that temporarily diminishes the feeling. Reward, still have to deal with the unpleasant feelings, plus the sugar headache. I can clearly see how I got caught in this habit loop, trying to escape difficult feelings with food, but ultimately it doesn't work. So not only was this person mapping out and being able to see how her mind worked, but at the same time she was starting to see how it wasn't actually doing that much for her, which is really what we think of as step 2, the beginning and the end. Now a little bit of neuroscience here is really important. So our brains, they store reward value in a bunch of things. There's a part of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex that's critical for this. So for example, I don't know if any of you can relate to this, if I eat some broccoli and then I eat some milk chocolate, my brain's going to say, okay, milk chocolate. I'd rather have milk chocolate than broccoli. And then if I eat some dark chocolate, my brain's going to check that hierarchy and say, okay, which one would you rather have? Again, for me, it's dark chocolate. So I think of this part of the brain as the BBO part of the brain. It's always looking for that bigger, better offer. So in the future, I'm offered milk or dark chocolate, my brain's going to say, dark chocolate, please. So as I mentioned earlier, if we can bring awareness in and start to see whether something is actually rewarding or not that rewarding, it helps our brain get accurate and updated information so it can see, why am I doing this? Not from an intellectual standpoint, but from an embodied standpoint. Here's a clear example. Person said, today all the cigarettes I smoked were disgusting, right? So that helps our brain naturally decrease that reward value, not from thinking or telling ourselves that we shouldn't smoke, but from that direct experience. I love this quote. Dear sneaky habit loop that says eating junk food is fun, I'm on to you. Right? Okay. So that step 2, again, just awareness, seeing what we're actually getting from our behaviors. Now with that, we can then bring in step 3, which I think of as rewards that are more rewarding. That opens up the space for our brain to get something more rewarding. Now, if we don't give it something more rewarding, it's going to go back to that old behavior because it says, well, I don't like it that much, but there's nothing that's better than this. So if we think of these old habits, it might be a negative emotion, it triggers us to eat, it triggers us to worry, it triggers us to smoke, it triggers us to check our social media, whatever. We might go to these things, we look at cute pictures of puppies on Instagram or whatever, so that we can get that brief relief. But it doesn't last. Cute pictures of puppies. Our brain says, oh, I get it. I need cuter pictures. Give me something better. And so it's like puppies and kittens. And we look at those for a while. And we're like, okay, what else? What else you got? Okay, puppies, kittens, and babies. And so it just goes on and on and on and on. Well, what I would suggest is these are actually looking outside of ourselves for happiness, saying, oh, if I look at pictures, or if I smoke a cigarette, or if I eat some candy or cake, then I feel better. What I would suggest is that we can actually turn inside, and that there might actually be that bigger, better offer that is always available, and that we never get habituated to. And here we can turn to Lewis Carroll in his wonderful book, Alice in Wonderland. Curiouser and curiouser. So what I would suggest is actually mindful awareness has this attitudinal component of curiosity. Instead of running away, we're looking, oh, what is this? What is this? What is this? And in fact, curiosity, if we substitute a curious awareness for something external, it's always available. And because it's always available, it might provide sustained relief. It's not like, I love this quote. There's a quote that says, curiosity is the cure for boredom. There is no cure for curiosity. Because it's always available. I'll give you an example of somebody working with this. This person said, when I first started the program, I didn't quite buy into the benefits of curiosity. Today I felt a wave of panic, and instead of immediate dread or fear, my automatic response was, that's interesting. And so you can see how she was replacing fear and worry and anxiety with curiosity, simply through training the mind to see how this works. So just go through this quickly because I want to get to some of the neuroscience. Basically, what we're seeing, whether it's, and I'll just give you 3 examples, but you can see with other behaviors too, social media, things like this. If we can start to map out how these habits work, and this has been around for a long, long time, we can actually see where there might be targeted solutions like curious awareness. Now, let's talk about what's going on in the brain now. So I'll start with a story. I actually mentioned this in my first TEDx talk, where I was talking about flow states. There's an athlete, Lolo Jones, 3-time Olympian. In 2008, she was favored to win the Olympic hurdles. In fact, she'd made it all the way to the finals, all the way to 9 and 10 hurdles. And then what happened? I'm going to read you a quote that she gave to Time magazine. She said, I was just in an amazing rhythm. And then I knew at one point I was winning the race. It wasn't like, oh, I'm winning the Olympic gold medal. It just seemed like another race. And then there was a time after that where I was telling myself to make sure my legs were snapping out, so I overtried. That's when I hit the hurdle. So what she's pointing out here is it's not about thinking, it's about being able to relate to our thoughts, to relate to our emotions, to relate to our body sensations differently, and that's what mindfulness does. In fact, you can think of this as we're getting in our own way. And in fact, we get in our own way a whole lot. I think of this as the caught-up continuum. We can get caught up in daydreaming. Farther along the spectrum, we can get caught up in stress. It's a little harder to snap out of stress. If we go farther down the spectrum, addiction, I like the simple definition, continued use despite adverse consequences. Right? When we're so addicted to something, even if we're aware of it, we have no control over it. But in fact, we actually know what this caught-upness feels like. There's a study that was done a couple of years ago when this group induced a bunch of emotions in folks, and you can see these are 2 prototypical examples. And they asked people to say, where do you feel this in your body? What does it feel like? And these are heat maps where they're showing where they feel this the most. Well, fear and anxiety cause this contraction and felt most in the chest, which is probably a protective mechanism. If we're being chased by that proverbial saber-toothed tiger, then it's important to make ourselves as small a target as possible. Now, if this is happening a lot, for example, daydreaming happens about 50% of waking life, we can actually map this neurobiologically. There's a part of the brain called the default mode network that seems to map on this pretty well. This brain network gets activated when we're daydreaming, when we're caught up in worry, when we're caught up in cravings and all sorts of things. I'll give you a couple examples. One of the hubs of the default mode network called the posterior cingulate cortex, I'm showing you here with a circle, gets activated when people are who are addicted to cocaine are shown pictures of people smoking crack cocaine. It lights up like a Christmas tree with nicotine addiction. We see the same thing with gambling. And in fact, one of my favorite studies, one of my friends who's a food researcher at Yale did this study where she fed people chocolate. And she found they would just have to rate how much they liked that. So at the beginning of the study, they're like, this is great, I'm getting paid to eat chocolate. So they rate this as 10 out of 10. She kept feeding and feeding and feeding them until they're like, oh my God, this is terrible. And they'd start rating this -10, eating more would make me sick. But in fact, this posterior cingulate cortex was activated at both ends of that spectrum. Both I want more and I want less. They get caught up in wanting more. They get caught up in trying to make things go away. So, how do all of these studies converge? We hypothesized that the posterior cingulate was actually a marker of getting caught up in our experience. And I'm a little short of time, so I'll go through this quickly. But basically, mindfulness training, the task here is to get out of our own way. And in fact, in the first study that we did with experienced meditators, we found that experienced versus novice meditators decreased activity in this brain network. You can see here the posterior cingulate cortex in the back of the brain, and then the medial prefrontal cortex in the front. So with these brain regions as markers to look at, we could actually then prospectively design studies to see if we could target those brain regions and see if those would correlate with clinical outcomes. So we did a study that we literally just published a couple of months ago where we brought people in who wanted to quit smoking. We showed them a bunch of pictures of people smoking so their posterior cingulate would get activated. We could measure this with fMRI. We could randomize them to get our Crave and Quit app or the National Cancer Institute's app, and then bring them back a month later, scan their brains again, and see if these correlated with outcomes. Now, long story short, we found a very strong correlation between a reduction in posterior cingulate activity and a reduction in cigarette smoking that was only in the mindfulness training group. No correlation in the control group at all. In fact, we even saw a dose-dependent relationship in the mindfulness training group. The more modules they completed, the better they did. In fact, we could account for about 58% of the variance with those two variables and one other variable, which was the baseline number of cigarettes folks were smoking. So here was the first study that we could actually find prospectively where we could take a theory, target a brain region, and have all of that line up with clinical outcomes. And for me, this is really a holy grail. So I think we're close to being out of time, so I'm just going to sum this up and say, we're really at a good time scientifically. We actually know a whole lot about how the mind works. What blows my mind is that we're not seeing more people take this knowledge and line this up to develop treatments that are effective. We're seeing this, my lab is doing this with mindfulness training, where we're starting to see that we can target the behaviors through curious awareness. But what I'd really love to see is folks really using these things instead of trying to develop more cognitive-based treatments, willpower-based things, which haven't been shown to be as useful as we're hoping in the past, to actually start looking more mechanistically. Oh yeah, and also just finished, the patient that I mentioned earlier, who came in with binge eating disorder, she lost about 40 pounds. But what was really remarkable to me was that she said, I feel like I have my life back. I can eat a single piece of pizza and actually enjoy it. So it wasn't about avoiding it, but it was about learning to relate differently to whatever it was, emotions, to objects like pizza and whatnot. So I'll just end with this wonderful poem from Rumi, who I think really just nails it. It says, there's a worm addicted to eating grape leaves. Suddenly he wakes up, call it grapes, whatever. Something wakes him up. He's no longer a worm. He's the entire vineyard, and the orchard too, the fruit, the promise of growing wisdom and joy. That does not need to devour. So we can just kind of let that settle in. And if I know I went through all of this very quickly, so I've got a bunch of resources on my website, all free, where you can learn, you can go back and look at some of these things. You can have access to our papers and whatnot. But I'll also, I love this quote from Mary Oliver. our dearly beloved Mary Oliver says, you know, instructions for living. Pay attention, be astonished, and tell it all. Thank you very much.
So again, a lot of information to digest, and we've got about 15 minutes break to do that. So we can meet at 3:30. Would you like to schedule them on the card? Thank you for not making me yell. It's much more pleasant this week. And so we have our third and final keynote speaker coming up. As Judd was speaking, I thought of some ways that you connect, and I think all of the speakers connect in many interesting ways. Judd emphasized the importance of curiosity about your own experience, and talked about the kinds of discoveries that you can make in terms of your own behavior as it relates to things like addiction. And Rhonda can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that a lot of her work is also about curiosity, about how you think, and also about the context in which you do that thinking. And so often the kinds of discoveries that she's most interested in, I think, or in her work, are things like discovering implicit bias that you might have, that you weren't aware of in the past. And again, how the context that you are in can impact the way you feel, the way you think, and the way you behave. And so that kind of awareness can help us to build contexts that are healthier, not only for ourselves, but the people within it and the people that that context serves. And so, just to tell you a bit about Rhonda, she is a fellow at the Mind and Life Institute, which some of you may be aware of. It's one of the major organizations for mindfulness in higher education. And she's also the former president of the board of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, which is another influential organization in higher ed. And she too has written a book. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it for this conference because it wasn't yet released. But it's called The Inner Work of Racial Justice, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. And it is, I believe, now available online and elsewhere. So we're privileged to have her with us today. She flew in all the way from California, and I'll let her tell you more about what she does. Good luck.
It's beautiful to be here. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of speak from here. I really appreciate this opportunity to kind of be here in New Hampshire. This is actually my first time being here. But I spent a lot of time in the Northeast working with Mind and Life, Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, and other organizations, who I see as being really kind of at the cutting edge of bringing these inner practices, mindfulness, compassion practices, and the like, these practices for, as we've heard so beautifully from Tim and Jeff so far, practices for deepening our awareness of what it means to be alive. Bringing that into classrooms, bringing that into the work that we're privileged to do, to work with young people, has been a passion of mine. And because of the particular work that I do, I'm a law professor, and I've been teaching for 21 years at the University of San Francisco. Yeah. And in the course of that, right, so 21 years teaching very traditional law classes like personal injury law on one hand, insurance law, immigration law, all the, slightly tough stuff, right? I also wanted to teach classes that really spoke to some of the unique ways that law law can be both part of our solution and part of our problem, right? That double-edged nature of law, right? Through which it can have, and has been historically so much a source of a lot of harm. And so really creating spaces and opportunities to support students in developing capacity to become professionals, right? These lawyers, but to become the kinds of professionals who could engage this role of being a counselor, a person to whom people will turn to in the moments of their greatest distress, through a deeper set of skills than the ones, frankly, that I had been given at the beautiful University of Virginia, where I went to law school, right? Because traditional legal education, like a lot of, disciplines, has invested itself in particular ways of forming people for that work. In the professions, typically we've got 3 apprenticeships, right? So an apprenticeship around knowledge. What are the core components of knowledge that a person needs to have to know? There's an apprenticeship around skills, right? What are the things that when you have that knowledge, what skills do you need to develop to apply? And the third one, in all professions, at least those who study these things, is a values apprenticeship. What are the values that run underneath that professional set of things? And in law, like in many professions, that values apprenticeship is often the least acknowledged, the least conscious, the most hidden, right? The most buried. And so growing up in law, for me, studying law was kind of a sort of being thrown into a world where I had an opportunity to experience that traditional training in legal education in the ways that it had worked since maybe, the founding of legal education in the 1870s, right? A particularly powerful moment in our cultural history, right? So when you look back at how law, as we think of it today, and legal education as we experience it today is formed, it dates all the way back to the period, frankly, of Reconstruction. Another very similar period in our post-slavery. This whole movement toward public educations and more formal education sort of dates in very important ways to that part of our history. And so law is no different from that. And a lot of the ways that we train lawyers dates all the way back to that period, actually. And a lot of the ways we get trained lawyers, especially since the time I was a law. And so it was certainly the case that when I was in law school, I learned all of these important skills, knowledge, and values, enabled me to kind of become a lawyer and practice for a while. But I also could feel the ways in which my own particular background as a Black woman born in the segregated South of the United States, I'll name the date, I think it matters, 1967, right? So I was born in 1967. And I'll say a little bit more about that, but just to name it, right? In the, might say, not quite desegregated South, right? 67, the last year of Martin Luther King's birth life on fire. So when I was born in August of that year, he was still around. By the time of my first birthday, he had been assassinated right in New York in April of 1968. So that was the context within which I was born and the place. Kinston, North Carolina, a little town. 50,000 or so people when I was born. It's now only about 20,000. So like a lot of smaller towns, deindustrializing, trying to find its new image in a new post-tech revolutionary world. So I come from that place where at that time, people like me were not expected to end up in places like this. You all understand what I'm saying? So pause and kind of think with me, reflect with me on the arc that the entire country has gone through in the, 52 years that I've been on the planet. Right? So 1967 to now, born at a time where, again, the entire society had been committed, still was and had been for many years, committed to a way of making opportunities available and not, that made people like me unlikely ever to get to places like this. It wasn't that it didn't ever happen, but it was very, extremely, extremely rare. We went through a period right? Where change happened at such a level that not only could I, become educated at the University of Virginia, in other ways prepare myself to enable me to be here, but we all know there have been other similar changes. Immigration law changes, so we have changed. So we have a much more diverse population today than we had back then. We've had our first African-American president. Right? Many changes demographically that I, in my own lifetime, walked through, saw, and experienced. And a lot of that's been beautiful. And I can say a little bit about how I see the intersection between those kinds of experiences and the work that I do to bring mindfulness in the world today. Reflecting on both the beauty of what all of those changes brought to me, but also the challenges, also the pain in the sense of disruption, if you will, that comes from change. Right? Anybody know what I'm talking about? So, right, we're at this moment now where a lot of us are feeling in our own ways some aspect of what I'm talking about. We all have entered on different arcs. We walked different paths to get here from different places. But we know something about the kind of particular challenges that being alive today in a post-civil rights era world, in a world that is radically more interconnected by technology, and radically more vulnerable as a result of climate transformation and other things, right? Than it was, 50 years ago, or maybe the arc that you were born into, right? So we know what we're up against a number of things, right? And so for me, being at this place where I'm a professor of law, I had this really rich opportunity to support students in preparing for this profession. And yet, the very traditional ways that we were taught to think about the knowledge, skills, and values, well, they, go so far. But when seen from the perspective of a person like me who has, who I entered into the profession knowing what it meant that the law itself could structure opportunity on the one hand or disadvantage on the other. And that for it to become a field that would create more opportunity for thriving, it needed to be able to apprehend its own ability to change. It needed to be able to support the development of practitioners of law who could also change and grow. And so some of those very traditional bases of knowledge and skills and values that, again, make for such thrilling dramatic television and movies, right? Right? Where's the law scene, right? Where's the court drama scene? Right? All of those skills, that's still happening in law school. But what about how to interview a person in a way that can listen and hear what's going on and not create more trauma? What about how to help discern what type of approach to resolving conflict, especially, for example, in a situation where relationships will somehow need to go on, let's say in a family context, in a community context. How might you help people resolve conflicts in ways that might minimize the likelihood that there's going to be nothing but trauma as a result of that conflict relationship? How can you do that kind of work in ways that maximize healing, growth, repair? These new ways of thinking about law always inspire me, right? New ways of really taking these old skills, knowledge sets, and being in conversation about the values, right? Really challenging what it is, what's the values base of these systems that we're committed to? Really helping to make the invisible more visible and create an opportunity to really reflect on what are these values at the foundation. Those are the kinds of things that drew me to law. And it was through my own concern for those kinds of things that I started to teach. And so in addition to the very traditional kinds of classes I started to teach, well, I very early started teaching classes around race and law. So looking at our history in the United States in particular. At the intersection of race and constitutional law, the notion of equality, liberty. Some of us are starting to understand the way in which those ideas, those really important ideas that we think of ourselves as Americans, weren't part of the original Constitution, right? Some of us are learning more about that as we 1619 series, for example, in the New York Times. Some of us, for the first time, are really thinking about the evolution in terms of our core values that was made possible as a result of, well, the centuries-long kind of conversation and cultural conflict around who matters, who gets included in our political community. That in the history of enslavement, like the history of colonization, the history of clearing the lands that made it possible for us, for example, to be here, right, clearing the lands of indigenous peoples and cultures. All of that history, right, and seen through the prism of this question of constitutional rights, who gets to belong, who gets to vote, who gets to shape our political community today. If you realize and look at that history, you cannot but see how notions of race and practices of exclusion, racism, sexism, and other forms of otherness have always been a part of who we are as a political community. And so part of how we got to a place where we celebrate something called an equality community, it has to do with the battle over the ending of slavery. Right? So it was not until the Reconstruction period, post-slavery, that we developed the 14th Amendment with its beautiful guarantees of equality, through which so much in the way of change and transformation for women, for the LGBTQIA plus community, right? All of these battles for kind of a more perfect union were enabled not by the founding founders, but the founders who came post-Civil War, who had a vision that we might actually find a way to have a political community that can develop. Trying to help train lawyers, right, who can both understand all of the core ways of thinking that are the foundation of the profession, but also have the kind of suppleness to grasp how it is that whatever law might be, it operates in a social, political, and cultural world that is in many ways committed to hierarchy and has in many ways helped maintain, frankly, systems of oppression. So how do you really work with both of those things? Well, you gotta have a big heart. You gotta have big, capacity to work with paradox, complexity, to be willing to see one's own biases and habits and traps of mind, and have the kind of courage to work with those things over a professional lifetime. So I'll say that my own, I had a kind of a crisis actually. So I mentioned that I was born in 1967, managed to be fortunate enough to come along during the period of desegregation and civil rights, you might say, sort of engagement that led to opportunities for me to go to college, to university, become a lawyer. I studied sociology at the graduate school level. I became a military officer. A lot of people don't know that part. A lot of different things, but a lot of efforts to kind of develop in ways that would make me potentially successful in this society. And I did all those things and found myself first a lawyer in San Francisco, a bit bereft of a set of practices that would help me navigate the world with some sense of belonging or groundedness. So it was at that time that I started looking into meditation, actually. So way back, when I started practicing law around 1993, I started looking for actually the kinds of practices that I had seen in my own grandmother's experience. So I mentioned I grew up in the South. I grew up with a grandmother. We mentioned grandmothers. Let's bring them into the room. And grandfathers, right? Each of us have these heritages. These teachers who are often unsung, who are not getting published, right? Who don't have the gold standard research behind them. But those people who, if we look and reflect, we know there have been people that have lived around who knew something about how to stay grounded, who knew something about how to move through difficult times in our lives and not, kind of get down and figure out how to get down and get back up. My grandmother was certainly one of those types of women. born in 1906, again, in a period where if when I was born, women like me weren't supposed to be here, certainly when she was born, no. Absolutely no. Whew. So reflect on that. What do we know about the systems of inequality that are in our own image? And what do we know, perhaps? What might we know more about how it is that our own lives have been shaped or formed by the systems that we're born into, that we didn't create, but we somehow have had to navigate, consciously or unconsciously, to get where we are. And the same, of course, is true for our parents and grandparents and so on, getting into this country and providing the background for our experience here. How can we reflect on those things together? What might our practices of mindfulness offer us in helping us understand the predicaments we find ourselves in from this more situated cultural structural place? So, my grandmother. By the time I come along in 1967, she had been called into the ministry. But most of her life had been spent as a very low-level worker. So, sharecropper, working in tobacco fields in North Carolina, picking tobacco. Had become a housekeeper and then been called to the ministry. And so, but what I saw as a little girl, my family was going through trouble and I spent a lot of time spending the night with my grandmother. I saw my grandmother getting up early, before dawn, staying in her room for 30, 45 minutes. And I later realized what she was doing was centering herself, centering prayer. She wouldn't have called it meditation, or mindfulness, certainly. But she had a deep discipline of centering that would enable her then to get up, raise up the rest of the family, get us off to school, get my uncle off to work, cook for us, and then go off to the work she did at that time, which was, again, cleaning houses. So just pause, just to say that some of these wisdom traditions that we are privileged now to be able to study and to learn and to teach, often they're coming from different cultural contexts that I think it's important for us to think well about, right? Often what we call mindfulness, drawn from Buddhist and other Asian communities, Asian heritage communities, without which we wouldn't be blessed to have the opportunities to sort of know them in the way that we know them. And a lot of cultures know something about awareness, compassion, clarity, disciplined ways of being in the world. And so for me, really looking at how I got in 1993 to this fancy place of a nice law firm job in California, but at the same time, very disconnected from the sense of who I was and how I was going to survive in that world of San Francisco that I found myself in. I realized I needed something that was akin to what my grandmother knew. Right? I'd gone through all this training and had missed. How is it that one grounds oneself for the challenges of one's particular life? And so, just like my grandmother figured out, I kind of, went my own path. I didn't do the exact kind of Christian-based practice that she did a deep dive in, though that's where my roots are. For me, there was something about more refined methods for really seeing how our minds work, seeing where we get caught, and really exploring that drew me to mindfulness and meditation, mindfulness-based meditation, and related practices. And so I brought those into my own life more robustly when I started law practice in 1993. Practiced for a while, became a law professor, and started to realize there was a split between what I was doing to sustain myself, needed to be able to teach these difficult courses, and what I was allowed to offer in my classrooms and allowed to explore with my students. And I felt like if I couldn't figure out a way to bring more of this into the classroom, maybe I shouldn't be a law professor. So I had this dark night experience where I almost left teaching. How many of you have had times when you've been in your career and you're just like, this is the thing, I got myself in this place. I've like succeeded. And then you look around and you're like, is this what it looks like? Is this all there is? And so I had a benefit of a really wonderful counselor who happened to be a spiritually trained counselor who had graduated from this university called Europa. right? Which is, a school that's known for infusing these perspectives into professional training. So this counselor said to me, you can always quit your job at this university where you've worked so hard. By then I had gotten tenure. I had not navigated well a marriage and divorce, and we managed okay. The divorce part was not as painful as it might have been, but I really sacrificed a lot to get this tenure job. And to say, maybe I should leave it. Well, her thought was, you can always leave it, but first, explore whether you could bring more of yourself. Explore whether you could drop a deeper anchor. Is there a way to bring what you know about the value of these practices that have been working for you? A seated, for me, meditation practice and body practice includes a lot of movement for me, yoga and dancing and singing. But how is it that these practices might be brought into law? And maybe you could experiment with that and say, give it a try. See if you can bring more of this into your work. And if it doesn't work, you can always quit. So this was back in 2003. And so those many years later, I've been experimenting with bringing mindfulness into law. And through that experimentation, I've been working with a network of people to change legal education, to bring in what many of us call a humanizing approach to legal work, so that our lawyers can be sources of healing and deep transformation and not just churning on. So that our lawyers can help think about restorative more forms of justice and repair that really portend the potential for really transforming how we do this thing called living together in complex, diverse times, where everything is connected and where the planet is telling us the way we've been doing it is not working. Is not working. So yes, I have written this book. It is coming out on Tuesday. And I have the one fresh out the press is hot here. And it is called The Inner Work of Racial Justice. Because that particular piece, how it is that we, and I have these little flyers in case anybody just wants to figure out how to get them, please grab one. That particular piece of how we deal with this thing called race. How many of us have learned over the last 5 years or so that we hadn't got quite as far as we thought we had? And I have to ask this because, I have been teaching classes and helping facilitate conversations about race and injustice for over 20 years. Hundreds, thousands of conversations and hours, tens of thousands of hours at it, really. And for many years, people would say to me, well, why are you doing this? We just elected Barack Obama. I call it the 2 O's. We had Obama and Oprah. The 2 O's was like, we're done, right? Why are you still talking about race? Because I knew, actually, that despite the appearance of these kind of exceptional success stories, the tensions that were present at the time of my birth, the deep cultural conflict about who belongs here, who doesn't, and how to navigate the sense of shrinking resources that's part of our experience in this sort of 21st century moment of reign. I knew that the challenges over race were not gone. As I write about in the book, I sort of feel like we had entered in kind of an uneasy truce that sort of grew up in a certain sense, really with the election of Barack Obama. How many of you realize that election was such a similar moment? A moment that both kind of peaked in a certain sense. We're like, we as a country can overcome some things. People literally dance in the streets in some places. Maybe you were one of them. Maybe not. But there was this exuberant sense that maybe we have really, really managed to heal in profound ways. And we can just celebrate. Some of us, even then, knew. This is one of those situations where for me, I don't relish being able to say we knew, like we told you so. Now something we kind of need to be able to say that. This is one of those where you wish you did not have to say. That we knew that this issue of racism, the kind of founding commitment to, let's say, white supremacy, that really created a quote-unquote, what some people consider a great nation. The founding commitment to white supremacy. Let me just say that again. That created what some people then and now consider a great nation. We haven't done away with that, even though lives have been lost in the Civil War and the many fronts of that war that continued through the period of segregation, desegregation up to now. So we're still, as a country, trying to really have a deep conversation about who matters, who belongs, how to do justice. And so the question that animates my work right now is, how does mindfulness work? These kind of personal practices that we've been talking about but on the one hand, last, with Judd in particular, we're thinking about how that cycle of craving and reward, these ways in which our mind kind of gets us hooked and makes it hard for us to get out of our own way. Very important aspect of the kind of what I call the personal justice work of mindfulness and as it relates to these issues. Personal peace, critical. Personal justice work. How do my own particular habits of mind get in my way? I wouldn't be here if I hadn't deeply grounded in that as a foundation principle. And interpersonal, systemic, collective have to be looked at. Have to be looked at. We cannot let these beautiful practices that we've been gifted to have an opportunity to experience and to share with others simply, right, recapitulate this idea that all change happens personally within ourselves. Because, as Judd pointed out, deep change happens in community. What kinds of communities? Well, communities which are engaged with these questions of who matters, who doesn't, how are we distributing resources, whose voices are we listening to, how are we creating opportunities to hear from all and to attend to the different kinds of suffering that are in our midst. So my work has really been about helping create ways of bringing us into engaging with those interpersonal and systemic or collective forms of justice. How does mindfulness support us with the interpersonal work and collective work of transformation? So there are many stories I could tell about all this. And I wrote the book in part to be able to tell some of the stories because you can't do it in these short pieces of presentation. But I will say that over the years I've had the opportunity to work with, many young people who've come in from all walks of life, the beauty of working in San Francisco, but also I've taught in Virginia, did a visit back at William & Mary for a while. All over the country, these issues are alive. And they've never gone anywhere. And so what I do is sort of just pause, because I could share stories of how students come to me today. For example, I have young white male students who just as recently as last fall came up to me and said things like, I don't have anybody to talk to about these issues of race. My family doesn't understand, they don't seem to be comfortable necessarily talking about these issues. The only people who want to talk to me about it are people who want to draw me into a divisive conversation about us versus them, about really joining the sort of white nationalist movement. These are the people that are getting sort of recruited by young men contacting. Are we reaching out? Those of us who think there might be a different way. Similarly, to provide a bridge into a way of seeing white experience that means something different. That means a bridge to connection as opposed to patterns of recreating those patterns of dominance and oppression. There's a role for mindfulness in this. All the things we've been talking about, dealing with the emotions that make it difficult for us to turn toward this aspect of our experience. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Just think about what's coming up as I reflect on at least just some of these things. I could say even more about the brutality, what's happening at the border. Right? We get specific, there's real visceral pain underlying on top. Right? So we might pause, and in the work that I do, I offer really experiential practices for looking at what happens to us when we are asked or presented with circumstances where we're turning toward these different things. So just right now, you might, for example, notice what's happening in the body. We're reflecting on what's going on in the border and the politics around it and the narrative around it. And the border, of course, is not just south of the United States. It's it's an imaginal conversation, the board. It's showing up in response to those who have suffered in the hurricane in the Bahamas, where a narrative about a lot of them are criminals, et cetera, right? Borders in our minds, in our culture, in our brains, right? Conditionings we have about who belongs and who doesn't. So when I talk about these things, just notice what we know from our own experience about what I'm saying. Where did you first learn something about your own embodied identities? Whether it be race, gender, the intersection between the two. What are some of the kind of seminal moments in your own life where you learned something about the difference that race can make, or the difference that gender can make, or the intersection, the difference of our immigration status? So for me, creating opportunities for us to use, if you will, these practices, to pause and turn toward the embodied sensation. Where do we feel this in our body? What comes up? What emotions? Right now, what are some of the emotions that come up when you do these things? Anybody be a little interactive with me?
Grief.
Grief. Can I see somebody who say grief? Grief. Are we a culture that knows we grieve and there's a lot of grief, but yet doesn't do grief well? Right? You're supposed to be over pretty quickly. Certain things you can grieve, but other things there's never a conversation about. Right? No, we don't do grief. We do it in a certain kind of way. It can be better. But grief. Grief. What else? Other emotions come up when we think about these issues.
Anxiety.
Anxiety. It's not just for doctors. We're all feeling anxiety. We're all feeling so much anxiety, and especially around these issues of cultural climate change is what I call it. I think there's a lot of climate change that we're dealing with, and always dealing with, and don't have a name for it. Yes, the environmental climate change, huge impacts on all of us, even when we don't realize it. A lot of researchers are looking at how it is that the changing climate is really causing us to feel differently in our bodies, more anxiety, and we realize we don't have a name for it. And I submit that that's true, it's as true for our social and cultural climate as it is for that environmental climate. We are up against some things and constantly feeling much more anxious than we used to as a result. Our mindfulness practices can help us look at what do we do when we get anxious around these issues of identity and inclusion. What are our particular habits? Let me just pause right there because we can go through other emotions. Let's say that fear, anger, pain, there's a whole lot. So a question then, once we look at what are our emotions, and each of us is going to be different, no cookie cutter. This is the beauty of mindfulness. 10,000 different ways. So we pause and create space to hold what might be true for you and how that might be different for you. Compassion. What are some of the things that we do with these emotions? When they come up. Habits that we notice, maybe. Yes? Deny them, yes. Like what, me? Maybe they, right? Let me go and talk to them about pausing. Maybe we all have some habits and some patterns around these things. Yes, we're all human. Yes, we do. So create these kinds of compassionate spaces for learning what our particular ways of denying. Yeah, so to see that maybe we deny it. Then to actually create, so and mindfulness teaching acronym with which many of you are probably well familiar, RAIN. I use it a lot in my practices around these issues as well. All the practices we've learned can be adapted to this very purpose. We just have to have the courage and the will to use them. So RAIN, recognize. Recognize that sometimes we go into denial patterns. Accept. For the moment, with compassion. For the moment, with some compassion. Yes, I too am tempted to deny these realities because it's really, really painful, but let me just accept for the moment. I do this. I see this. I know what this is like. And this is hard for those of us who want to be involved in justice work, because accepting for the moment can sound a little bit like giving everybody a pass, right? How many of you right here, right now, be like, uh-oh, where's this going? Where's this acceptance? Right? There's a temptation to be like, I'm out when we talk about a mindful holding of all of this. Right? The anger part. Don't get me started, right? So just creating a space for whatever might be here. Accepting. So yeah, some of us can't do deny or might be tempted to deny. Some of us don't have the luxury of it. So just to note that, that's part of why it can be frustrating in mixed conversations to talk about what's going on, because we're very differently positioned around these things we're talking about. So our lives are differently vulnerable or not. So coming together to reflect on these things is not easy, but these practices can help us. So with some compassion, recognizing, accepting what our particular challenges might be, investigating, R-A-I-N, the RAIN acronym. Investigate. What's the reward that comes from denying? What do I get out of just sort of not? It's not that big a deal. Minimizing. What I saw for many of the years before the recent last few years, again, it's not that big a deal. You got the 2 O's. What are the rewards, right, over Obama? What are the rewards that come from minimizing? The habits, right? What are the loops that we get in that reinforce? I can just keep denying this. I had an opportunity to do a workshop with I often do work around this topic with mindfulness teachers. Because I actually think this isn't necessarily for the just started mindfulness crowd, what I'm talking about here. It's because our identities are so closely held. And the challenge of really each of us looking at how each of us might get stuck is somehow, differently difficult for all of us, but I don't think it's easy for anybody. And so you usually don't start the opening meditation class with reflect on your race, your racism, reflect on your internalized sexism and homophobia, right? We don't we get the raisin out. That's race. We're gonna sit with a raisin. And then we write after some work with that, and wow, we can think all the different ways we hold the raisin. That's right. So much easier to do that. And even with that, it's amazing, right? The different ways we can talk about that. But mindfulness really opens us up to how we're all living, even in this moment, 10,000 different experiences of this moment. And we've all come to this moment from I don't know how many trillion different experiences that have taught us, that live in our bodies, around things like what race means, what our gender means, what areas of the planet are racialized, and what professions are gendered. We know that this is in us. We probably don't have to talk about it, we just know it. So bringing mindfulness to possibility for recognizing, accepting, without being at war with reality, as they say. For the moment, we're just accepting that I need to see this and understand this a little more. I investigate. What do I see when I look at this? What do patterns of denial give me in terms of reward? What does anger as my main go-to? How is it that I suffer in all of this? How might I open up to more flexibility in the responses to these challenges? And on and on and on. I love the I and the brain practice, by the way, investigation. I just touched on a few different ways that gives us that moment to be more free of the conditioned habitual responses that we have to our triggers. We pause. We notice the temptation to go into a story about, how this is somebody else's problem, I don't have to worry about this. The children will fix this, right? There's so many ways that it's better over time. My kids don't have these views. They're more liberal. Except you start to see that the people who are often marching, and there's a whole range of ages. The children are being brought into this kind of re-engagement with racism and sexism and all the other isms in lightning speed, partly because of the beauty of this technology. So recognize, accept, investigate, and end with non-identification or non-attachment as best as possible. We don't, once we see something, invest what we see with a whole new story instead of reactions. As much as possible, sort of put it out there and look at it. I notice I do a little bit of denial, or I get really angry, or I get numb. right? I feel exhausted, whatever it is. Recognizing, accepting, investigating it with non-attachment or non-identification kind of means just like realizing that you can be free in the next moment to perhaps engage with what you just noticed a bit differently. It's not a new invitation to tell a whole brand new story about who you are, right? And now telling the story of what I learned in my meditation about anti-racism, that's my new story. About my privilege to hold, I hold my privilege means creating both that opportunity to see, but also not get stuck. That's mindfulness. That's the beauty and the opportunity. Not easy. So we have to start with things like a raisin or the chocolate or whatever. But if we don't expand to the subtler, more challenging aspects of our experience and see the dimensions of personal to interpersonal to systemic collective, because we were thrown in these worlds that formed in us the sense of who we are around these things. We didn't create all these things, but they are operating on us all the time, and they're operating on our children. If we do not realize that this moment that we have to develop the capacity for mindfulness, for compassion, really is a moment that maybe won't come again. We are at a point where if we can't figure out how to work better together on this planet, where everything is connected, where resources are abundant, but we have allowed vast inequalities that really threaten us all. And where the ways we've gone about the process of knowing, right, investigating the world, organizing the world for income and all of that, these things are killing us. If we cannot bring mindfulness to those aspects, those kind of collective challenges of how we change this together, going back to Tim's project, of course, and seeing the intersection between the two. We are, I think, well, let's say, we can do better. Let's not look at what would happen if we don't. We can do this. So I just want to kind of close by saying I look forward to this conversation we're going to have here on stage, or we're going to be the panel discussion here. And I really want to just say that I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that these practices and the work that we're doing really does have the potential to help us heal personally, heal interpersonally, and we got some healing to do, all of us. And that work looks different for each of us. But it's important that we all figure out where are the wounds that we are bringing, that our parents brought, that the heritages that we were born into, brought into this world that are part of the world against right now. What can we do in the short moment that we have on this planet to try to do our own healing, to help each other heal, and to help transform how we work together? Mindfulness and compassion practices can do this for us. We can do this together through these practices. And thank you. Thank you so much for listening and for all of you.
And did you meditate today? Well, it's funny because I came to meditation through yoga, and I actually remember being in a yoga class before I was a serious meditator, and the yoga teacher said, she said at the beginning of class, she said, present moment is considered an exotic destination because so few people have actually been there. And I dabbled in it for years, right? And what happened was when I found myself doing a documentary on mindfulness, I decided that I was going to commit myself to practice because I wanted to be in sync with the people that I was reporting on. Because there is a certain presence that comes from this continued practice, right? So I'm really glad that I'm here with you guys. You're very present. Like, this is the most present panel I've ever been in my life. You're looking at me, you're listening. Anyway, proof is in the pudding, right? So what's so interesting is there is this amazing cumulative effect. And what I wanted you guys to start off, well, first I want to share this one anecdote that came into my inbox as I was preparing for this. It's from the Center for Healthy Minds in Wisconsin. You guys are familiar with their work, Richard Davidson. They do a lot of work with meditation and contemplative practices. So they recently released this study which said that strangers perceive long-term meditators as less neurotic, more conscientious, and more mindful than those new to meditation. So I'm wondering, do you find in your goings about your life that people respond to you differently because you meditate? We'll start with you, John.
You need to clone me and then it's a great question. It's hard to reflect on just because I'm just in that exchange with them, so I'm not sure how they might interact with me differently. So I know that my wife certainly seems to be happier when I'm present. So if that's any indication, that's probably the best evidence I can get right now. Yeah.
It's hard to be present in marriage at times, right?
It is.
Yeah. Now you've got the most difficult job being present and dealing with a lot of conflict day in, day out. I'm wondering how does it help you?
Well, it's hard to be present in my marriage too when I'm campaigning out on the road. But, and I think people assume as a politician they think I'm neurotic in some way because I chose to be in politics. So that has its own thing. But it's, you learn so much from people. Like my job is really like listening to understand when you're on the campaign trail. And I find it, all the books in the world want, but when you're talking to another human being who is suffering for cutting pills in order to, make them last throughout the month, or choosing between food and medication, or all of the trauma, the racism that people deal with every single day. That to me is like the moment of learning, and so I'm very in tune to that because I know how powerful it is for me to take that and then share it with other audiences who need to hear it or trying to heal is part of, I think, our job as political leaders. And so that means usually I'm in places they're not, and we all can kind of get in our lane and dealing with life as we see it and thinking that somebody else may have it easier, or getting something that we're not. And then for the leader's job, I think, is to be the person who says, yeah, there's a lot of other people suffering too. How can we try to deal with this together?
And then, of course, there are people, because they know you're a meditator, they're like, looking like, there's this meditation, this meditation. It was a little edgy today, right? And our kids have loved ones. I don't have kids, but kids in my family, our loved ones are the first ones that were like, they have enough time on our Christmas day. Right? So yeah, there are lots of different ways that people meet through our meditation, but generally I do think, for me, as a lawyer, people often sort of say, oh, isn't that an oxymoron? Like you are a meditative lawyer, that you're bringing compassion to law. So I think it's really interesting that we're at a moment where in our culture it's more accepted that we are engaging in these practices. But it wasn't always this way, right? And so just in our lifetimes, it's become more accepted and seen as something that is worthy of our efforts and a benefit to others who are around us.
So part of this deeper conversation about how mindfulness can play a part in society, Congressman Ryan, you said something in a recent article that I read about yoga and mindfulness techniques that are part of what you see as the next version of America, which you alluded to in your talk, of course. So this coping with and overcoming these challenges that we face with economic anxiety and addiction, lack of sleep, where right now you said where we learn to take care of ourselves where technology and systems don't run us, but we learn to run them. So right now, technology is running us, right? We're obsessed with our phones. As you said, it's the object of mass distraction. How do you respond to that right now?
The elementary example is Star Wars. You turn into Darth Vader, or do you maintain your humanity and be all Luke Skywalkers? But where the systems can eat you up, systems and transform the systems to where the systems are the food system that I talked about. Think about what that's doing to us. So how do we create systems that enrich us, that lift us up, and move us forward? And to me, you look back at when we were passing civil rights bills, not perfect, we had all these problems, but it was beginning to bring people of color into society. And there were laws that were being established to protect their ability to vote and their ability to participate in the economic gains of the world. You look at Medicare that lifted seniors out of poverty. I mean, people, it's hard to believe today, but there was a point in this country where senior citizens didn't have health care. And of course, there's no business model that makes it a good idea to cover senior citizens. So we came up with it, and it lifted people up. Medicaid lifted people up, and there was legal aid to make sure that people had access to the law, and public defenders, that no matter how poor you were, you had access to the system. Public education, Pell Grants. These things were all designed to lift us up. And now we're at the end of that arc of those systems working. Now they're not anymore. We were going to feed the world. We were subsidizing farmers to produce all this food, and it sounded like such a great idea. And in some ways it really was, but now it got industrialized. And so it's time to reform these systems. And that's why I think it's so, that's what I meant. And those systems are keeping us down now. I think it would be a very exciting time for us if we're the generation of people who transform those systems to get them lifting us back up.
Yeah, just to say, I think about how it is that we often think about rewards and benefits from this very personal perspective. And we often don't think about the interpersonal power and joy, frankly, that comes from being in connections, in connected community that's working. There's research that shows, in fact, that we're healthier overall in societies and communities where there's less inequality. So that the people who are better off actually are less healthy if they're better off in a society with a lot of inequality than they are in a society where it's a little more equal. So, I mean, there are many, that's just one example of the kind of non-obvious ways that inequality and distance and separation actually are harming us more than we realize. And there's all kinds of research that shows the benefits of effective collaboration, working together. Whether it's research that the military has done, or schools did to support desegregation back in the day. We know more about what works to bring people together. But there are certain things that we need to add to support to this. In other words, people are anxious when we think about bringing people together across different these days. There's research, for example, I'm thinking of a study of college students who were told on one hand, there's mixed college students of different backgrounds, racial backgrounds and genders. Well, actually, separate gender groups. So young men, mixed backgrounds, told to come together and talk about romance. Organize a room for this conversation. Young men brought the take chairs all together, right? They were talking about dating today on campus. They brought the chairs together for like really leaning in and having this conversation. Transform the conversation with frame. We're going to talk about race. The chairs were pulled back. What does that show? We sort of forecasted that it's going to be hard. So that's just one piece of example. Yes, research shows we can benefit from being together and become empowered. Right? We can figure out how to work together and do things together, right? And feel the joy of actually doing things together. But it doesn't come easily, especially now when we've had these habits of separation. Overcoming that forecasted fear, that sense that we can't do this, takes some doing. But these practices can help us. So, yeah.
Well, okay, so one of the habits of separation is, a weapon of mass distraction, our cell phones, right? And it is affecting, I live in New York City, and I would say even in the last year, I cannot see anyone's face. All I see is the top of their head when they're walking down the street. Can we just talk for a minute about how addictive these things are, and what the release is in the brain, and why we keep looking at them in the middle of the night when we have
Hold on a
insomnia?
second.
I haven't checked Twitter, okay? So I need to hear a good, from you.
priest because there's a ton, and there are many, many people in Silicon Valley working right now to make them even more addictive because it's a great business model. So a couple of key points. One is immediate availability. So we never had these, these things. It's like a slot machine in our pocket. We never had it before. And by slot machine, I mean intermittent reinforcement. You never know when it's going to ring or tweet or beep or whatever. And so that's actually the most reinforcing type of learning. It's not when you know when something's going to happen, but when you don't know when something suddenly happens. There's a surprise and our brain says, oh, who texted me? And it's like burning a hole in our pocket. So it could be anybody, it doesn't matter. It's just that it's that text is, we don't know who that is, that uncertainty. And our brains hate uncertainty. So those are a couple of pieces that just totally jack the dopamine system in the brain. There was a study that showed, this was with Instagram, adolescents with Instagram feeds, where they showed them their own Instagram feeds, and the only manipulation they made was how many likes they got. And what they found was that not only was the reward system activated, but they're also their self-referential system, the posterior cingulate guy I was talking about today. So there are clear links between self and reward, and it's this exciting quality that comes from it. But I think as Ron was pointing out, if we're not paying attention to how rewarding these things actually are, and comparing them directly to things like kindness and connection, helping people, okay, what was it like when you did this and you were right across from your friend versus when you did this and you guys actually looked at each other. There's a lot of, so another piece there is we can quantify reward value. So you can tell exactly how many likes your post got. And so it's much easier because there's less uncertainty to say, I'm going to do that, than like have a conversation with somebody and have to deal with all the ambiguity of body language and facial expression, all that, which is the majority of how we communicate. And so we lose all that communication and the ability to pay attention, to see what that's like, and to be with that uncertainty and be curious about it, as compared to, well, I know exactly how many likes I got from this post. Yeah.
And meanwhile, we are living in a socio-political climate that is requiring us to be to try to be more present. I mean, we're it's a perfect storm, right?
There's some level of distortion there too. I mean, from the political standpoint, Pew did a study on Twitter, and it's that 7% of the electorate is on Twitter, and of the 7%, I mean, where I come from, it drives the news, it drives politicians. And so 7% are on Twitter. Seven.
Yeah.
7. And of the 7%, 40% have not activated their account. Right? So now you're down to whatever that percentage is. But 100% of reporters are on Twitter. 100% of politicians are on Twitter. And you wonder why you turn on the TV and you see a conversation happening on TV that has very little to do with the trauma we talked about today, unless it's the race issue, because it could, be scintillating. And but the actual problems that, like, I just say this, like in the Democratic debates, we had 5. The first 4 debates, each were 2 hours, okay? And there was not one question about K-12 education. Now, how in God's name are we having one of the 2 major political parties in the United States of America running to nominate a president of the United States? You have 8 hours of discussion, not one question about the trauma that our kids are going through every day because of opiates, because of income inequality, because of domestic violence, because of sexual violence, because of racism, whatever. It wasn't even part of the conversation. And to me, it's because those goddamn kids aren't on Twitter. Shame on them. So they now are not part of the national conversation. Now I get really upset with this because we should be trying to solve this problem and having a national discussion about it, and instead, because it's so distorted, we're not having that discussion because it's not on Twitter. And to me, that's talking about reversing chronic disease. We're not talking about some of these very major issues. And so that addiction is translating into a distorted national conversation. I guess
It's
Yeah.
we're studying this, hopefully one day we'll be on the other side.
if we're all still here though.
If we're all, yeah, so I had this experience recently. I was not being mindful. I had my headphones on. I was staring at my phone. I was waiting for the subway. It came, the doors open. I slammed my way through, and I completely cut off a woman who was a person of color. She was very upset with me, and I don't blame her one bit. I mean, in many ways, maybe I represented 400 years of racism, and I was fine to take that. But I did everything I could in that moment because I started to feel myself knee-jerk reaction. No, I didn't do it on purpose. I just wasn't paying attention. And then the mindfulness kicked in, and I was like, I'm not going to be a jerk in response. I'm going to pause and say, I'm so sorry. I said, I was distracted by my phone. She said, well, you shouldn't be looking at your phone. I'm like, I know. I know. But she was still very upset with me. And so I did everything I could in my power to change that, right? So I guess what I want to ask you, Rhonda, is there a way to deliver a mindful apology when you've obviously done something wrong, especially when we're having these really hard conversations about race,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Apologies will be required sometimes.
And sometimes we deliver a non-apology thinking we're apologizing. If you see that, sorry.
Yes.
You see that in politics.
No problem.
You are the guy. Sorry, I'm the only one here, so.
Right. So, I mean, for me, it's a really good question because it points to what I see as part of what these practices can help us do, which is to sort of be in it. Be in it. Like, so, I could say some things about what the apology might look like, but the bigger question is like, what does it look like to have the capacity to turn toward and say, that didn't feel so great. I can feel I'm socially mindful. I see this other person didn't think it was so good. How can I make some effort toward repair? I think of the term gesture, a gesture toward repair, a gesture of some responsibility for the social world I live in and for what might linger from this moment. So one thing is just to be aware that we can make these gestures when we know, if we're willing to notice and to be a little vulnerable, and right. So all of that, like whatever all that content is, of like that, I'm just pointing toward using the phrase "be in it," be willing to be in it, because being together socially, you're absolutely right. The digitalized human landscape is doing something really hard on us, I think. Right? This whole way in which we have so often gotten titillated by communicating online, and that makes it that much more difficult for many of us to communicate in these more nuanced ways that are required for the will to be in it. So that to me includes, knowing that sometimes we do that stuff. Certainly if we're going to be in a mixed, diverse community, we're going to sometimes miss each other. I mean, just think about it. You look around this room. Like, just think of the radically different backgrounds. I could ask people to raise hands, where did you grow up, whether you have parents who were born outside of the country, et cetera, what level of education did they have. We've all come to this moment from radically different places and backgrounds. The fact that we understand each other at all is kind of a miracle. But that we are going to miss each other sometimes is 100% predictable. But yet we are so used to these much more cut and dry ways of communicating and being together that when we are in those moments where it's like we actually have to do something to help repair, we need, in other words, I think, much more compassion with ourselves. We need opportunities to be together in conversations where there's enough capacity to give you some space to make a mistake, that you can get some practice taking that risk and knowing that you're not going to necessarily fall. So we need, this to me is why we create mindful communications for work or communities of practice around the social aspects of what it means to work together today. So that we can just get some experience, like, well, here's what this apology is going to look like, and I can give you some feedback, or I can can role play that. But really, it's not about having a script for how to do it, but it is about seeing that these practices can help us build a kind of courageous capacity to continue making these gestures of responsibility and connection that are going to be necessary if we're going to get to this moment of, polarization and the drive toward dehumanization. I think that comes with intense distress.
If I could just add two pieces of that. One is that I think with social media, there's this drive to perfection, where teenagers are taking like 12 pictures to find the perfect one to post.
Just the teenagers.
Yeah, right. Just those kids, right. So we've lost I think we're looking on the wrong path, which is what's wrong with making mistakes, tripping up? That's actually where we learn. And so changing the conversation from being perfect to perfectly imperfect to really enjoy the fall because we learn more. And then that brings in the authenticity. So really looking at to go back to word value, sorry, how painful it is to kind of try to hold our ego up versus just to be authentic and wow, dude, I totally screwed up that. It's just so much more freeing. And on the other end, from speaking from the perspective of having tripped up a bunch of times, the authenticity comes through, with the apology, so much more than trying to, I am this type of person. So those are two pieces I would just add to that.
Absolutely. I just add one other, too. And the next step. Because if you have been on the harmed side of that equation, this piece of the conversation can fry the patience, right? We're going to create more space for messing up.
No, exactly.
Right? So then the question is, how then do we bring mindfulness to the work of messing up less and also creating structures and support for equitably repairing whatever it is that makes some people more likely to be on the receiving end of the mess up and some of us more likely, you know what I'm talking about, right? So really attending to those maldistributions that are the source of that kind of sense that, wait, why am I always the one having to help create the space for you to be able to mess up?
Right.
Why don't we make this whole system work more equitably? That's bringing mindfulness to this other kind of level, and that's
Just that. This is great.
I love it.
So with the mindfulness pieces, many of you may have heard of Carol Dweck, who brought up this concept of growth mindset and fixed mindset. And so the idea is when we're closed down, we can't actually learn. And so if we are humble and we're okay with screwing up, we can actually learn more quickly, more efficiently, so that there is less screwing up. But if we're sorry, we're not going to learn anything. So I would say that's another place where mindfulness can help us actually open to bowing to the screw up as a teacher. So that, especially when we really see how much suffering it costs, boy, that is a fire under our butts to not do that ever again. And if we're open to that, then it's much easier to learn and to not screw up in the future. So the process becomes a great learning.
And then have compassion and rules for it. Right? Let's go.
Yeah.
When you talk about a growth mindset, you apply that to the political conversation, or lack of conversation in the country. What is it? It's, I'm labeled as this, and I have no interest in learning something from the other side. And if I'm on this side, I'm going to click on the websites that are going to tell me how smart I am and how right I am, and I don't want to hear anything, how wrong they are. And so there's no, let's sit down and learn. I mean, the whole idea that has gone through the ringer. And right now, we don't have any of that, so there's no growth mindset in the political discussion. And that's causing a lot of pain and stifling and narrowness and anger and fear.
It just sucked for my choice,
And
yeah.
just, yeah, just keeps going.
So mindfulness, we know, helps cultivate compassion. And I interviewed a former neo-Nazi who said to me what helped him actually get out of the movement. One of the things that helped him get out of the white power movement was acts of compassion from someone who he would have harmed, he was willing to harm, right? It was someone being nice to him in a way. And he said to me, it is so hard to have compassion for people who have no compassion, and yet those are the people who need it the most. So I wonder, what's your response to that?
I say amen.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely it's hard. I was in a co-facilitating a retreat where this topic came up. It was not very long after the Charlottesville incidents, which left at least one person, as you know, dead. And a lot of us in a lot of pain, especially those of us who have experienced on the streets and communities up in Charlottesville. As I mentioned, I went to school there for 8 years at the mine. And I knew that street where all that stuff happened, where the protests happened that we had to hire people to walk that street. So it was a painful time. And we were in this workshop, mostly white, maybe half male, half female, relatively privileged folks. And I was talking a little bit about the challenge of bringing mindfulness to this, and I hammed it up, and I shared that one of the things that had happened to me was that even in my little neighborhood in San Francisco, there had recently been some incidents of unwelcome, let's say in my neighborhood. Someone, whoever it was, I don't know, tagging a few homes on our street, including my home, my partner. My partner happens to be South Asian American and Indian American. And we walk out of our house and there are eggs, remnants on our house, on our cars. Like, okay, kids throwing eggs. Let's figure out what we can about this. We walk down the street and we see the other cars, but only selected. And the other people coming out and going like, who would do this? It's really like, like, ooh. The only other East Asian people in the neighborhood, Asian people in the neighborhood, only other brown people in the neighborhood. So someone had figured out who lives where on this long street and decided to let us know that they knew where we lived by this one act. So I mentioned this as a means of saying we are experiencing these things right now in a way that we had hoped would be over, even in places like San Francisco, Texas. And quite racialized man, and I say racialized because just to sort of create some awareness that this is a construction, this idea of whiteness, all of these races. This young man said, well, what about having compassion for the people who don't want you all to be here? So, there was a moment. Not easy to hear, kind of, right? I see the body language. Right? Because that's what I felt. I had that moment like, go look for it. That's it. Right? But really also, it wasn't the first time I'd had that reflection. So there's two pieces. One is to know that we deserve protection and we deserve safety. Right? We deserve not necessarily to be the ones to confront the person who thinks we might as well be dead. And in a world where there are guns and all of that, and what we carry, right? So we are right in our right place to say no to be the one to go up and confront a particular person who might pose the most physical danger. But that doesn't give us, I don't feel it gives me a kind of justification or it doesn't put me in a place of then not wanting to do my work to try and imagine how, but for the grace of God, I could also be tempted to have this view that other people don't belong. But for the grace of God, and I've seen it in people who are racialized and gendered just like me, a kind of bias that operates in similar kinds of ways. I've seen that. I know it can happen. So how do we get to those places of feeling like other people don't belong and we want to make them feel uncomfortable? There is a way that our practices can help us with having that compassion, but it's, again, we don't start the mindfulness class with this. But eventually we can work on this, because I think if we don't, you know, this is the work of this time. This is the work.
So the other thing we know about mindfulness, we all sort of touched on it, is that it helps relieve suffering. But it seems counterintuitive to want to lean into something, into discomfort, right? This is something you do in therapy a lot, right? Lean into that discomfort, and because it's what the practice asks of us. But in a lot of cases, what we'll do instead of leaning in, we'll self-medicate with alcohol and drugs and phone. I mean, anything to deal with this anxiety, right? What can you say about that process of embracing discomfort and how it actually will alleviate the suffering, as opposed to what you would think it would just make it feel worse? It was a good, short answer.
One thing that I would start with is it's really important to see how painful not leaving in is. So substance abuse is a way to not lean in, avoidance, depression, all the things that we do that seem to work in them until they stop working, and then we wonder what the heck happened. So I would, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but even starting there to see, well, how well is whatever I'm doing to not lean in working? There's motivational interviewing, for example, is a technique. Motivational interviewing in one sentence, right? It's basically a guy comes into my office and they want to quit drinking, and I say, why don't you drink more? Which is kind of paradoxical, but it gets right to the heart of the question of, well, they have to look at what the consequences of drinking are, and if they drank more, how those consequences would be worse. So it actually brings it right up to see what the turning away, the suppression, the repression, the whatever is doing, so that they can actually see, I think of this mechanistically, is they see how unrewarding that is. You gotta have that first, because otherwise leaning in is forcing, and that's actually doing the same amount of harm, or could be doing the same amount of harm, because mindfulness isn't about forcing anything. It's about actually being interested and curious. And it's only when we're ready to be interested and curious and see that that's the only way that we will be drawn in, when we basically can't not look. I remember my teacher saying there was a place for him where he would rather face the pain than not face it, because he could see so clearly that not facing it was always worse. And so that's the piece where we can bring awareness in, look, not facing it dead in me. And how does that compare to facing it? And when we bring that openness, it's actually not as bad as we think that it will be.
I guess my job here is to apply that to the body politic. We're ignoring the trauma of our kids, we're ignoring the trauma to our earth, our environment. We're ignoring the trauma caused by race, and we keep putting our heads in the sand, and matters just keep getting worse. And now we have a country that has an opiate epidemic, a suicide epidemic, a health epidemic that's caused by the anxiety and the stress and the diet that's coming from some of these other issues where we're putting our head in the sand. And so at some point, you've got to have the courage to look at it bigger and it gets infected, and it gets harder and harder to clean up. And so, part of why I like coming to these and having these conversations is that we need all of you, not just us, not that we do it perfectly, I'm not saying that at all, but we need everybody to, as you leave here, go out and be that energy node or that person nudging the people around you, say, look, I don't really want to have a conversation about teen suicide. I can't think of anything worse to talk about. But if we don't talk about it, there's going to be more. And if we don't talk about why people are addicted to opiates, then we're going to have more of it. If we don't recognize these huge gaps of income between the wealthiest people and the poorest people, we've got to face that. And it's not, and maybe you're doing well, so you don't want me to have income. Like, we're doing well, and I don't have enough time to worry about everybody else. But if you're here, if you're sitting in a seat here right now, I think you have some responsibility to go out and whatever neighborhood you go to, whatever school you go to, whatever business you go to help just turn the conversation to face these challenges.
Apparently 72% of people experience loneliness. That is incredible and heartbreaking. I mean, right, we've all, I'm sure, right? I mean, there are a lot of people in this room. And in many ways, we are in the midst of this great spiritual crisis in this country, where we're experiencing high rates of loneliness, we're self-medicating, and we're not seeing each other. But, and yet the awareness for mindfulness is here. So, what are your thoughts on that? Feel free to meditate
All we can,
before you give your answer.
I think there's a couple of things, a couple of ways to approach it. One's personally, what can we do to see people that don't feel seen in small, little, kind-hearted gestures that you could make that make a big difference. And I think we've all been on the receiving end of those. So we can do that. And then how do we try to create these systems? And I think we've talked about it today. How do we create these systems in our schools where we're teaching our children how to resolve conflict, how to see the other side? And one of the social emotional learning programs, they get the book Stella Luna. Really mess this up because I don't remember the entire thing, but there's like bats and birds, and they get like one of the ones gets mixed up and doesn't know who it is, so it's looking at the other group. And then the exercise in the class is they do a Venn diagram, and they have to say, okay, what are the bats like, what are the birds like, and what do they have in common? Middle. And then the kids would then go do an exercise with each other to pair off. And then you had the black kid and the white kid, and they would have to say, okay, what do we have? What are our differences? And then what do we have in common? So one day, when I was visiting a school, I'm watching this happen. And there's a little African American girl, and she has dreadlocks, and a little light white skin kid there, and they're going back and forth. And they're talking about what they have in common. And she goes through, we both have eyes, and we both have hair. And then she got stopped, and she couldn't figure out what the third thing they had in common would be. And she paused, I'm just sitting and watching what she said. And she says, we're both human beings. And I was like, one of the kids was like, what's crying in the back of our class. And it was just so insightful, poignant, touching. Like, we can teach this. This is teachable. And it used to be taught in the homes, and when we didn't have this, and we were living on farms or whatever, it was just a different time. And the grandparents lived in the house, so there was that generational wisdom that you talked about that was getting passed along. But we can teach this. So personal acts, but also how can we be innovative enough to say, oh, me, it's performing these institutions. And in each instance, I don't go through them all again, but it's criminal justice and the earth, and education, healthcare. But in each instance, we can get closer to the earth with the food we're creating. That's a connection issue there. The race issue is a connection issue. We'll just talk about education. That's a connection issue. Healthcare, you're disconnected from the food that you need to sustain your body to function at a very high level. So let's be about the business of creating institutions that connect us with the self.
I think you inspired me to think of like simple experiments that we can do individually, like walk down the street with our phone in our pockets and just look to see if we can make eye contact with people and smile, like a call it smiling meditation practice. Just walk down the street and see what that's like to connect with people. New York City would be a fascinating place to do that.
Getting between them and their phone. I want in on this. I'm telling you. I want a piece of that action.
On the street too.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do that. You all heard it here first.
Well, to bring it here, as we do when we teach, just to say, like, we're a room of people. And we've been having the privilege of kind of speaking at you all. So can we pause and take a moment? We're here with each other. Can we maybe look around into the faces of the good people who, like you, decided this would be a good way to spend, see each other. See who's here. See who's here. See who's here. See who's not here. No, but I don't mean it that way. I don't mean the empty seats. I mean, there are patterns you might, if you're willing to first see each other's beautiful faces. Like again, we've had this chance to see you, your energy, we feel this. But when we're sitting in this style, this structure, I love this structure for engagements, and whenever I engage with people, I'm always trying as much as possible to have us all be able to see each other. Because looking at the back of each other's heads is not really necessarily the best way to connect with each other. And I think everything we do could be an opportunity for connection. So yes, going down the streets of New York, but right here. Right here, taking a moment to see each other, connect with each other. There are practices we can do. Ubuntu. How many of you are familiar with the phrase Ubuntu? This is a concept out of South Africa that, and other perhaps countries in Africa, but I know it to be a concept in philosophy with deep roots in South Africa, which in shorthand means I am because you are, because you are I am. I am because you are, because you are I am, because you are and I am we are. Right? Just that interpersonal awareness. And it is the ground for a lot of the core kind of indigenous practices in certain cultures in South Africa. So that when they meet each other, they, rather than say, hi, how are you doing? They say things like, I see you. I see you as a group. So, I mean, there are ways that we can practice doing these things, and I actually think we should practice doing these. That even when we have these kinds of conferences, we should be thinking about ways that we can bring right into these moments opportunities to break down some of these patterns of isolated disconnect. We should leave today, this conference on mindfulness in society, feeling again that same kind of like disconnect. We're here. We can be here and be more present together. The only other thing I want to name is that, I love my friend Tim mentioning that, yes, we come into the world, into cultures and communities, and maybe traditionally there was some knowledge around how to do more of this. And I do think that's certainly true to a degree. Much more knowledge about how to be with each other. Remember, there used not to be not just phones, but, the phonograph or the radio. People used to have to sing to entertain each other at dinner, right? Like, that's what they did. There wasn't some fancy person who was getting paid to sing. We sang together. And we've lost that. Now we have this idea that only the professionals do those things, and we miss that opportunity. So there are all kinds of little ways that these ways of connecting in body ways. Singing is healing. Right? But we've lost that as something that we can do and we sing sometimes in my engagements with folks because again, that can heal. But just to say that while some of this is stuff we've lost, some of it actually, frankly, I wrote this book because I deeply believe this. Some of these practices and commitments, intentional actions, gestures, we've never learned and we've never had to learn because we've never been as challenged as we are today around, first of all, radical interconnectedness, cultural change, and that cultural climate change that creates more of the potential that we will meet each other from very different places, whether it's by race, sexual orientation, ways of expressing gender. There's a lot of change afoot. And so we actually need to cultivate practices that allow us. And so it's not just going back to what we knew, but it's actually raising up, meeting the challenge of today, and realizing that there really are challenges that we are maybe never as a human species had to have the capacity to meet in the global sense or the personal sense in our own backyard. We're being challenged in new ways to connect and to care about each other. And we have to figure out how to do this. So that, I think, we have to add to our list of kind of motivations we bring to the practice. Intentional cultivation of the capacity to reconnect despite experiences of difference, and doing that on a regular basis.
So what do you do when you get stuck with your meditation practice? Because you do plateau with things, right? With all things. And what do you do? What do you do with best practice?
I started implementing, like when I get really stuck, I love doing breathing techniques. That gets me right back on track. I mean, literally, like, I don't feel like I get stuck anymore because it's just like I'll do, I don't know what it does. I mean, I don't know what the pranayama breathing, yoga breathing stuff really does. I've read a little bit about it, but it drops me right back in. And I got a breathing app that a friend of mine gave me. He designed it. It's called the breathing app.
Good marketing.
Talk about simplifying things, right? Stripping it all down. Because I laughed when I found out too. Yeah, it's just a resonance breathing app. You can, it actually, Moby, the artist, did the sound on it, but it's you can say 4 in, 4 out, 5 in, 5 out, 6 in, 6 out. And you can just set it down, set the timer for 10, 15 minutes, and you can do 6 in, 6 out. Just close your eyes. I mean, boom, just like drop right in. I've been sending it to everybody. It's all, you know how you get obsessed with something really big. You know how you get obsessed with things?
And it's okay, right?
Yeah, it's all right. I've been sending it to everybody. I sent it to my kids. My son's got a football game tonight. I was like, do your breathing app today. And he lied to me and said he did. So, see how he does it? That's what I do. And then we have this, it's called Project Welcome Home Troops. It's a class for vets. And it's healing vets. It's an incredible program. It's 5 days long, 3 hours a day for 5 days. And it's literally getting these vets off their meds. They go from like 10 or 12 prescription drugs down to 1 or 2. It's healing them. It's helping them process the trauma. So there's a bunch of those techniques in there that I do.
I'll briefly say, not to go check out that breathing app.
Yeah. I'll send it.
Yeah, I think I like curiosity is like a superpower because even feeling stuck, we can get curious about what feeling stuck feels like. We're bored. Oh, what's bored feel like? Or oh, I'm not feeling curious. What is that feeling? So it helps kind of reinvigorate the attitudinal quality and the interest to look at whatever it is. So whatever that stuckness is, I find that the curiosity is a great solvent.
For me, I try to, those, certainly, I use my share of apps sometimes and explore looking more at the experience finding other people to practice with and varying practices. So yeah, giving myself permission to see singing and movement and dance as part of my practices. And when Civic isn't doing it, which is sometimes a won't for me, partly because I am also a child, a survivor of trauma and lots of other things. I've learned, there's a book called My Grandmother's Hands, which, if there's another book besides mine that you're going to come by on this topic, My Grandmother's Hands, which again gets us thinking about intergenerational trauma and the way mindfulness can help free us. And my book as well looks at how it is that we're carrying a lot of this in our body, and not just sitting mindfulness practices, movement practices, not just the traditional yogic and qigong, but yes, dance and singing and holding each other's hands. So for me, getting together in community helps me on stuff. And again, I'm tempted to say, we just talked about apps, we just talked about breathing. Can we breathe a little bit together? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this is just an offering. Feel free to just kind of jot down notes if you'd rather not practice together with these strangers. Your new friends. Yeah, I knew our own practice community. But if we can just pause, there are many different breath practices. I'm going to just offer one because I'm inspired by Tim's comments. There's one called the 4-7-8 breath practice. How many of you are familiar with 4-7-8? Right? It's one that a lot of medical professionals actually teach as kind of anxiety reducing kind of practice. But just see what works for you. The idea, and I'll speak it out and we can practice it together, is to breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7 counts, and breathe out through the mouth slowly for 8 counts. So breathing out longer. So breathe in for 4, hold for 7, breathe out for 8. Try that again on your own pace. And also, we've been talking about compassion and self-compassion practices. For some of us, some of this conversation might have been challenging. Even these breath practices might be for some of us, depending on where we are physically. So self-compassion practice, if you're willing to handle the hard one just over the belt. Really allowing yourself this kind of sense of the support from the tactile experience of touch. We know that when we hold another person's hand, we place our hand on someone's back, we can comfort each other, we can comfort ourselves anytime by simple gestures of putting our hands on these very important centers of energy, the heart, the belly button, just below the belly button. And breathing in. And if it helps, perhaps recalling a person or a place where you felt really safe and nurtured. Just allowing yourself in the next in-breath to live, just sense into what it feels like to be remembered, that you have been in the presence of love and nurture, you have been in a place where you felt safe. And then lastly, we can add a little bit of the common humanity-enhancing practice. Whenever we're having a moment where we're suffering, this is the work of Christian Neff and others, researchers who have given us a sense of how these practices can help us connect with each other. When we're suffering, if we can remember and say inwardly to ourselves some version of the following: this is a moment of suffering, it's a moment of challenge for me, it's a moment of difficulty for me. Other human beings feel moments like this, suffer in this way, have these kinds of challenges, just like me. In other words, I'm not alone in this moment. And then the third inward recitation would be, and I, like other human beings, deserve support for these difficult moments that I encounter in my life. I deserve this moment of support. Feeling the ground beneath us, feeling the support of being in the space together. Whenever you're ready. From this place, begin. Thank you for being willing to practice.
Let's keep going.
Let's drop in.
We'll be back in 2 hours for you. Thank you very much for a really amazing conversation. I will only do panels with people who practice.